Hey guys, tonight we're hitching up our oxen, loading the wagons, and setting off into one of the grimiest, most grueling yet weirdly romanticised adventures in American history. Yeah, we're talking about the Oregon Trail, the ultimate choose-your-own disaster experience. You've probably heard of it, maybe even died of dysentery on an old-school classroom computer, but tonight you're going to live it. And spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments what city you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It starts in the spring of 1846. You've spent the winter in Missouri watching the snow melt and waiting for the land to thaw. Now it's April, and the buzz in Independence is electric. Dozens of families like yours, wagons lined up for days, oxen steaming in the morning chill. You're leaving behind a modest farmhouse, your favourite tree, your town, maybe even some relatives who think you're insane for going west. But you've got gold-tinted dreams and whispers of lush farmland in Oregon Territory. In truth, you don't really know what's out there. You just know it has to be better than what you're leaving behind. Debts, over-farmed land, and yet another year of not enough rain. There's an odd energy in the air. Some people are giddy, treating this like a grand vacation. Others have that 1,000-yard stare, like they've already imagined every one of their children buried in a shallow grave. You're caught in between. You've packed, repacked, and repacked again. You've argued with your spouse about whether to bring the rocking chair. You've bought enough flour to bake bread for an entire cavalry, and yet even with all this planning there's a gnawing feeling that something, maybe many somethings, are going to go very wrong. Your wagon is sturdy, or so the man who sold it claimed. The canvas top is stretched over wooden bows, offering shade but not much else. Inside you've crammed in everything from barrels of bacon and beans to a small iron stove you absolutely insisted on bringing, despite your cousin's warning that it's dead weight. You've got rifles, a cast iron skillet, a coffee grinder, and one slightly smushed porcelain doll for your daughter, and yet already you're wondering if it's too much. You hear the oxen before you see them, snorting, massive beasts with the kind of eyes that seem older than civilization itself. You're told they're better than horses, slower, yes, but steadier, less likely to break a leg. You pat one on the side and it lets out a sound that's equal parts bored and disgusted. It's going to be a long ride. On the morning of departure, the town is chaos. Children are crying, mothers are snapping at fathers, and a guy named Lester is arguing about who gets to be wagon master. Spoiler, you do not want to be wagon master. It's a glorified babysitting job where you get blamed for every wrong turn, a lost ox, and misjudged river depth. But you also don't want Lester doing it. He once tried to trade a live chicken for a haircut. You vote for the quiet farmer from Ohio instead. He seems less likely to steer you into a canyon. Your first steps on the trail are weirdly underwhelming. There's no trumpet fanfare, no cinematic sweep of prairie grass, just a muddy path and the creak of wooden wheels. The realization hits you like a sack of flour. You are walking a lot. Sure, you could ride in the wagon, but only if you want to jostle against barrels and be crushed by shifting cargo. So you walk. Everyone does, except the elderly and the injured, which you're not yet, but give it time. A strange mix of emotions follows. Excitement flares when you pass the last general store. Fear kicks in once you realise that everything familiar is now behind you. The trees start to thin out, the houses vanish, and the land rolls flat and wide. It's beautiful in a desolate sort of way, like being on another planet made entirely of grass and bugs. Speaking of bugs, they are immediate and aggressive. By the first night, you've slapped more mosquitoes than you can count and learned that prairie gnats fly directly into your eyes on purpose, probably out of spite. You pitch camp beside a lazy creek and everyone tries to pretend this is fun. Fires are built, songs are sung, someone even tries to tell a joke. But the truth is, you're already tired. Your boots are too stiff and the kids won't stop asking when you'll be there. As you lie on a blanket beneath the wagon because tent space is tight, you find yourself listening. The distant lowing of oxen, the rhythmic snoring of the family next to yours, coyote maybe, or someone's very sick mule. The night is cold and the ground is harder than you expected. Your hip already hurts. The stars above are breathtaking though, an ocean of silver, so wide and clear it feels like falling upward. You tell yourself this will be worth it. that in 6 months you'll have your own land, your own home, and a chance at something better. But for now, you can't shake the feeling that you've just made the biggest mistake of your life. Here's your historical fact of the night. Roughly 400,000 people travelled the Oregon Trail between the 1830s and 1860s. That's like emptying a modern football stadium and marching everyone 2,000 miles across unforgiving terrain with nothing but wooden wagons and hope. Quirky fact, some people actually brought pianos, like real pianos. Spoiler, they didn't make it. Many ended up abandoned on the side of the trail like a trail of broken dreams and out-of-tune ambitions, and a hot debate. Scholars still argue over whether the journey was fueled more by religious zeal, economic desperation, or just good old American wanderlust. Probably all three, plus a hefty scoop of not knowing what the heck they were in for. By the second day, your feet already hate you. You wake up feeling like you've been trampled by your own oxen, which honestly might have happened, considering how badly they sleepwalk when spooked by coyotes. Your back is sore from the ground, your eyes crusted with dust, and your boots feel like medieval torture devices. Still, you're up with the sun because that's what trail life demands. There are no snooze buttons out here, only the sounds of creaking wheels, squawking chickens, and someone already yelling about lost coffee beans. You choke down a breakfast of damp cornbread and coffee made from yesterday's boiled grounds, and then it's back to the same old rhythm. Pack up camp, yell at the children, yoke the oxen, curse whoever made the decision to pack your entire life into a rolling wooden box and drag it across half a continent. By mile 10, it becomes painfully clear. Riding in the wagon is a fantasy. The jostling alone could dislodge your spine. Every bump in the trail is a full-body event. It's smoother to walk, sort of. Well, not smoother, but you don't feel like your brain's being knocked loose with every rut and rock. The wagons creak and groan like ships on dry land, and your feet thud against the hard-packed earth in a steady dragging beat. You thought this would be an adventure, a westward journey like the ones in penny novels. What you didn't count on is how mind-numbing the routine would be. Wake, walk, eat, walk, set up camp, sleep, repeat, and this is just the beginning. By mid-morning you start noticing something else. Your fellow travellers are getting on your nerves. Turns out putting 50 strangers together in tight quarters with minimal hygiene and lots of beans leads to tension. Someone's dog keeps chasing chickens. Another guy insists on playing the fiddle while walking. You didn't know it was possible to play off-key while fiddling one string, but here we are. And don't even get started on the woman who keeps humming the same hymn over and over like it's a magic spell. Still, there's a certain comfort in the group, like a slow-moving herd of anxious buffalo. You travel in clusters, sometimes 3 or 4 wagons across, blocking the trail and arguing about whether this counts as making good time. You form friendships, grudges, and vague alliances like it's some wagon train reality show. There's always one couple having a loud fight by the fire, someone who's just a little sick but coughing up a lung, and that one guy who won't stop talking about his land claim in Oregon like he already owns half the territory. You try to keep your spirits up. After all, the scenery is changing. You're leaving behind the scrubby edges of Missouri and moving into open plains, golden waves of grass that ripple with every gust of wind. It's beautiful, but it's also endless. The land seems to stretch forever, flat and shimmering in the sun, with no trees in sight. And the trail itself. It's just 2 dusty grooves beaten into the earth by thousands of wagons that came before you. A rut of history, and now you're in it. You get to know your wagon in ways you never wanted to. Every creak is a new fear. Every lurch means something is shifting, probably in the worst possible way. The back wheel is always threatening to pop off, the canvas top flaps in the wind like it's mocking you. Inside, everything is packed tight, barrels, bedding, tools, and somehow it still smells like wet wood and old cheese. You tried to keep things organised, but the first time you hit a pothole the size of a bathtub, your careful packing turned into a chaotic stew of flour, boots, and personal shame. Your oxen, bless their plodding, slobbery souls, are the real MVP. Slow, yes, but strong and stubborn, like trail-borne tanks. You talk to them now, half out of boredom, half out of the creeping suspicion they're smarter than some of the people in your party. You name them ridiculous things, butterscotch and thunderhoof. You don't know why, but it helps. When thunderhoof poops mid-walk, you just sigh and step around it like you've been doing this your whole life. Around midday, you finally stop to rest. It's hot. Your shirt sticks to your back, and you swear you've never drunk so much water in your life and still felt dry. The group circles up near a sparse patch of trees. Shade, blessed shade. and someone passes around biscuits that taste like flour and sadness. You stretch your leg, check the wagon wheels, and try to ignore the growing pile of flies buzzing around your food. Someone suggests pushing on another 5 miles before sundown. A groan ripples through the camp. This, you realise, is the real Oregon Trail experience. It's not the cholera. Not yet. It's the constant motion, the monotony, the way your body begins to rebel, even as your brain numbs. You've barely travelled 30 miles and already you feel like you've aged a year. Your muscles ache, your nerves fray, and every little sound, oxen snorting, someone whining about dry bread, feels like a personal attack. Historically, pioneers covered an average of 15 to 20 miles a day on a good stretch. But not every day is good. Rain, wheel breakage, sick animals, everything slows you down. And you haven't even hit a real obstacle yet. This is the easy part. This is the warm-up. Quirky fact, some pioneers actually brought homemade wagon seats designed to swing from the canvas ribs, sort of like hammock chairs, so they could avoid the brutal jostling. Most of these snapped or dumped their passengers straight into flour barrels during the first rough trail patch. You chuckle at the memory of one woman hanging upside down like a flustered bat, legs tangled in mud, a bonnet shrieking at her husband. And here's something scholars still debate. Why did so many pioneers assume they could just figure it out once they got to Oregon? Many didn't know how to farm, build homes, or even hunt. They just believed the land would provide. It's still unclear whether this was sheer optimism or just the most aggressive group manifestation in history. By the time you make camp again, your boots are crusted with mud, your legs feel like jelly, and your youngest has developed a mysterious rash. You're too tired to care. You lay back under the wagon, your body bruised and baking in the late sun, and stare up at the underside of your home on wheels. It's only been 2 days, but you already understand something crucial. This trail is going to strip you down. No illusions, no comforts, just you, the road, and a whole lot of walking. By the end of your first week on the trail, you've discovered that this journey is less of a solo mission and more like a slowly unravelling small-town drama on wheels. Your wagon isn't just yours anymore. It's part of a larger caravan, a ragtag collective of roughly 20 families bound together by desperation, wild ambition, and the hope that someone else packed more beans than you did. You quickly learn that survival out here isn't just about strength or endurance, it's about teamwork, politics, and a whole lot of compromise. Every morning starts with a group meeting. The wagon master, quiet Ohio guy, still in charge for now, gathers everyone around and lays out the route for the day. He's calm and reasonable, which is probably why everyone's secretly preparing to overthrow him. Decisions have to be made constantly. Do you take the flatter northern route that adds mileage but saves the oxen? Or the shortcut through the Rocky Hills that has a 50-50 chance of wrecking a wheel or two? Votes are cast, opinions are shared, and someone, always, manages to make it personal. You never realised how many different ways there are to argue about the direction north. Some swear by compasses, others by the sun, and one guy just follows the behaviour of squirrels. You silently vow never to listen to the squirrel guy again after his last shortcut led to a 6-hour detour and an argument so loud it scared off the wildlife. Then there's the issue of wagon spacing. Too close and you risk a wheel-to-wheel disaster, too far and you're vulnerable to attacks. Well, theoretically. Mostly the danger is losing sight of the caravan and getting hopelessly turned around in what looks like a grassy sea of sameness. So you keep close, trailing behind your neighbour's wagon while trying to ignore the way their supplies are tied down with string and prayer. You're all in this together, like it or not. Soon the caravan starts to splinter into roles. There's the wagon master, of course, who becomes more of a therapist than a leader. There's a scout, a wiry guy with eyes like a hawk and the social skills of a raccoon, who rides ahead to look for rivers, trails, and potential hazards. He rarely speaks unless it's bad news, and when he does speak, it's usually along the lines of, "That bridge is a lie," or "We'll have to eat the mule." Charming fellow, you find yourself pulled into these group dynamics more than you'd like. Someone needs help fixing a broken wheel. You're suddenly a carpenter. A child has wandered off after a butterfly. You're now a tracker. Someone needs extra lard for tonight's beans. You're somehow the lard guy. Cooperation becomes a necessity, not a choice. But so does gossip. Oh, the gossip. Who's feuding with whom? Who's been hoarding sugar? Who's secretly carrying more whiskey than anyone admitted? Every campfire brings fresh drama. It's like Survivor Prairie Edition. Sometimes things get tense. A bad decision from the wagon master, like choosing a muddy shortcut, results in days lost and patience worn thin. People start murmuring about forming a new group, electing a new leader. You find yourself caught in quiet conversations, little factions forming around personalities instead of reason. You side with the group that seems least likely to yell at you before coffee. There's also a growing concern about fairness. Who gets to stop for breaks? Who leads the line when the trail narrows? Who decides how long the noon halt lasts? These sound like minor issues, but after a week of blisters, heat and dust in every bodily crevice, they feel monumental. You watch grown adults argue for 20 minutes about whether it's time to circle the wagons or keep moving. Meanwhile, the oxen are falling asleep where they stand. One day, a decision has to be made about leaving someone behind. A man's axle is broken, and he doesn't have a spare. It's early in the trail, and most families are still hoarding their extra parts like gold. He begs. His wife is crying. His children look dazed and dust-covered. The wagon master says if someone gives him an axle, the whole train has to wait a day for repairs. The man from Kentucky volunteers. He has an extra. But as soon as he offers, someone else complains that it'll slow everyone down. Tensions rise, voices escalate. In the end, the vote is split. The wagon master casts the tiebreaker, the caravan waits, and just like that, a sense of unity returns, for now. You spend the day helping patch up the broken wagon. Others gather wood, check oxen shoes, and share food. It's weird how close you can feel to people after only a week of eating dust together. You laugh more that evening than you have since leaving Missouri. A girl braids your daughter's hair. A young man tries to play harmonica but only knows one song and keeps starting it over. For a moment, everything feels almost cozy. Here's your historical fact. Real-life wagon trains were often organised with detailed rules. Some even wrote constitutions, complete with fines for rule-breaking. One train fined a man $2 for swearing in front of children. Trail justice. Fast and kind of adorable. Now, for a quirky fact, some caravans had unofficial judges who were elected to settle disputes. These were usually just stern-looking older men with no real legal background, but they carried the gavel, sometimes literally. In one case, a man ruled on a dispute between two women over pie theft and justice was served. The pie was not. As for scholarly debate, historians still argue whether the wagon train system created democratic micro-societies or just barely organised chaos. Some say it was a proto-version of the American frontier town, with evolving social norms and even primitive elections. Others call it a Lord of the Flies on Wheels situation, held together by shared desperation and salted pork. That night you lie awake thinking about the people you're travelling with. Strangers turned companions. Rivals turned teammates. You wonder who will be there at the end of this trail. And quietly, you wonder if you will be. There comes a moment, usually around day 10, when you realise you packed your entire life into a wooden box the size of a garden shed, and dragged it into the wilderness like that was a rational decision. You stare into the wagon, sweat soaking your collar, and wonder why in the blazing prairie sun you thought it was necessary to bring 4 cast-iron pans, a rocking chair, and your uncle's taxidermied duck. It's not just clutter now, it's dead weight. And dead weight has to go, and at first everyone is precious about their belongings. There's a weird pride in how neatly things were packed, like you're all contestants on some frontier version of Tetris. But now, on a scorching afternoon, when the trail becomes more sand than soil, and your oxen are looking at you like you're personally responsible for their misery, something shifts. You realise every extra pound is another minute of suffering, another reason the wheel creaks with that horrible splintering sound no one wants to hear. And so the great shedding begins. It starts subtly, a broken stool, a bucket that cracked in the heat, easy choices. But soon, hard decisions have to be made. A woman you've barely spoken to is weeping as she hands off her china teacups to the prairie wind. A man tosses out a family portrait after a tense debate with his teenage son, who insists that hauling it is pointless. You try to pretend it's all logical, survival-based, but there's grief laced in every item left behind. These things weren't just cargo. They were memories, comforts, the last threads of the lives you all left back in Missouri. Your own sacrifices come with a little less ceremony. That stove you insisted on bringing? Gone. Rolled down a small hill and abandoned next to a surprisingly dignified pile of rejected bedposts. You keep the skillet, the coffee grinder, and your one luxury, a slightly water-stained copy of Gulliver's Travels. It doesn't weigh much, and some nights, reading by firelight keeps you from screaming at the sky. Food and supplies take priority now. Everyone starts double-checking their rations. Flour, salt, coffee, sugar. If you have it, you count it twice. If you don't, you start eyeing the neighbour's wagon and wondering if they'd notice a few spoonfuls missing. The flour barrels are shrinking faster than you hoped. Someone realises their bacon has gone rancid. The stench is immediate and offensive, like a punch in the sinuses. You help them bury it, feeling equal parts sad and envious that they had enough bacon to rot in the first place. You also learn about a new unit of measurement: space. Every inch matters. That small corner behind the wheel hub, suddenly perfect for rope. The hollow space under the tool chest, excellent for dried beans. Children get crammed between bags of rice and crates of canned peaches. Nobody's comfortable, nobody's clean. You're all just bags of humanity being shuffled daily across an unforgiving landscape. And then there's the constant battle with the wagon itself. You've never hated wood so much in your life. The planks warp in the heat. The wheels wobble no matter how often you reinforce them. Your husband or wife is perpetually covered in axle grease, swearing softly as they tighten spokes with a stick and sheer willpower. You joke about building a new wagon from all the parts being jettisoned along the way. Someone laughs, then seriously considers it. Resourcefulness or madness? Hard to tell anymore. Midweek, you cross a stretch of prairie so flat and wide it feels like the edge of the world. The trail is marked only by the faded remains of broken furniture, spilled nails, and the occasional tragic doll head staring blankly at the sky. You pass a chair with only one leg, a boot missing its partner, a Bible, pages fluttering in the wind like tiny white flags. It's a ghostly procession of dreams discarded, and it reminds you that most people ahead of you probably went through the same agonising triage of personal belongings. By now, conversations at night have shifted. Less about the future, more about the practical. How many sacks of flour do you have left? Who's good at mending boots? Has anyone figured out how to patch a hole in canvas without it immediately tearing again? Someone shares a tip about soaking dried beans in river water overnight to make them cook faster. Another person, older and meaner, says you're all fools for not bringing hardtack. Bugs don't eat it, and neither do we, he growls, chewing it anyway. Historical side note. Most wagons had to carry 600 to 1,000 pounds of flour alone, plus bacon, lard, beans, rice, and a disturbingly large amount of coffee. Every family brought what they thought they'd need to survive 6 months, forgetting that surviving also meant dragging all that stuff across mountain ranges and rivers without the benefit of paved roads or common sense. Quirky fact: one woman brought a grandfather clock, convinced it would be useful for maintaining a sense of order. It lasted 5 days before toppling over in the wagon and shattering into a pile of metaphor. She reportedly turned the clock face into a skillet lid. Now that's frontier innovation. And here's a fun academic squabble. Some historians claim the iconic covered wagon, the prairie schooner, was rarely used for actual riding due to discomfort and danger. Others argue that families routinely rotated riders to rest the elderly and young. No one can quite agree how much time pioneers spent inside their wagons versus trudging outside in the dust. What's certain, you're definitely not riding. You're hoofing it day after day because it turns out human legs are more reliable than hand-built wheels. That evening you settle into camp and take stock. You've lost a few items to the trail gods, but you've gained something else: ruthlessness. You look at every object with suspicion now. Does it earn its space? Does it pull its weight? If not, it goes. Sentimentality gets you nowhere when your back is sore and your oxen are drooling from exhaustion. You sit near the fire, chewing on dry jerky that tastes like leather mixed with regret. A nearby wagon is burning their broken bed frame and the flames crackle like applause. Someone passes around a jug of something vaguely alcoholic. You take a sip and cough violently, but your muscles relax for the first time in days. You think about home, your old house, the chair by the window, the dishes you left behind. You miss it all and none of it at the same time. What you've really left behind, you're starting to realise, is comfort. And there's no going back. You're not quite sure when the dread sets in, but it hits one morning, just as you squat behind a bush with a shovel in one hand and an unsettling gurgle in your gut. There are no bathrooms on the Oregon Trail, just open prairie, a bit of modesty, and a desperate hope that no one's looking. You dig fast, do your business even faster, and pray the wind doesn't shift. Welcome to the glamorous life of a westward pioneer, where your daily bowel movements are a public health hazard and also the #1 cause of death on the trail. It turns out dysentery is not just a funny punchline on an old computer game. It is a living, gut-twisting nightmare that moves through the camp like an invisible storm, wiping out dignity and hydration in equal measure. And it's not alone. There's cholera, typhoid, scurvy, and something the wagon master refers to ominously as plains fever. All you know is that people are sweating, vomiting, and collapsing in ways that no amount of herbal tea can fix. The root of all this? Hygiene, or the complete and utter lack of it. Soap is precious and mostly reserved for clothes, which still end up looking like they were washed in sadness. Bathing is a rare treat, something you do only when the weather's perfect, the river's deep enough, and you're feeling brave enough to expose your bare backside to an audience of mosquitoes and judging squirrels. Clothes stay on until they practically walk off by themselves. By week 3, you could bottle the smell of your boots and sell it as eau de regret. You do your best to stay clean. You wipe your hands with rags soaked in vinegar. You rinse dishes with sand and prayer. But there's only so much you can do when you're sharing a ladle with 20 other people and the nearest clean water is downstream from where the oxen bathe, drink, and relieve themselves. You start to play a mental game. Is this sickness from the beans, the water, or just the creeping realization that you made a terrible life choice? Sickness moves fast out here. One kid starts coughing on Monday, and by Wednesday half the caravan is walking like zombies. You watch a woman boil rags for compresses while muttering about garlic poultices. Someone else suggests bleeding the sick to balance the humours. You nod politely and then quietly hide all the sharp objects. There's no doctor among you, just rumours of one farther down the trail near Fort Laramie. You pray you'll make it that far. One evening the camp is quiet. Too quiet. A man named Harris, older, always joked he was too stubborn to die, hasn't moved from his bedroll in hours. His wife stands over him, fanning him with the bonnet, while others gather nearby pretending not to stare. You catch a glimpse of his face, pale, sweating, and drawn tight like a sheet left too long in the sun. No one says the word, but everyone's thinking it. Cholera, the death sentence in disguise. Here's your historical fact for the night. Cholera was the leading killer on the Oregon Trail, responsible for an estimated 10,000 deaths. That's 10,000 people who set off for a better life and never made it past Nebraska. It spread through contaminated water and poor sanitation, and it could kill in a matter of hours. You could go to bed with a stomachache and be buried by sunrise. Quirky fact? Some people tried to ward off disease by wearing garlic necklaces, burning animal dung, or placing silver coins in their drinking barrels. One woman swore by keeping a potato in her pocket to draw the fever out. It worked about as well as you'd expect. Meanwhile, scholars still argue about how much the pioneers actually understood about germs. Germ theory wasn't widely accepted yet, so a lot of folks blamed bad air, unlucky stars, or moral failings. Some journals described people moving their wagons to avoid sick winds, or burying the dead facing away from camp to prevent spirits from returning. It wasn't science, but when you're desperate, superstition feels oddly comforting. Back in camp, Harris passes away just before dawn. His wife doesn't cry, she just folds his blanket, tucks it under his chin, and sits quietly until someone comes with a shovel. They bury him on a small hill overlooking the trail, pile stones on top to keep the animals away, and carve his name into a piece of oak. A few people say a prayer. Most just keep their heads down, focused on not being next. You help dig the grave because everyone helps. The soil is dry and packed tight, the kind of earth that resists intrusion. As you shovel, sweat dripping into your eyes, you wonder how many more graves you'll dig before this is over. Probably too many. It's a sobering thought, one that follows you even after the sun rises and the wagons creak back into motion. From that day forward, you see the trail differently, not just as a road to Oregon, but as a corridor of loss. Every few miles there's another grave, sometimes marked, sometimes not. You pass makeshift headstones with names fading in the wind, little crosses of willow wood, even one coffin wedged awkwardly between two boulders. You start to recognise the signs, a group walking slower than usual, someone missing from the evening circle, a bundle of clothes left behind without ceremony. At night, when the fire flickers low and the stars feel too close, you catch yourself listening for coughs in the dark. You count them like sheep. 1, 2, 3. Silence. Then a deep hack from across camp, and you exhale. Relieved that it's not someone from your wagon, not yet. You start boiling all your water. You scrape every dish twice. You even fashion a crude latrine pit away from camp and try to convince others to use it. Most do. A few roll their eyes and go wherever the urge strikes. You quietly judge them. There's no pride left on the trail, but there is a kind of desperate hygiene-based hierarchy, and you're clawing your way to the top. That night you manage to rinse your face with cold stream water and sit by the fire, feeling almost human. You clutch your journal, scrawling down every little detail, not because it matters to anyone else, but because you want to remember. The pain, the fear, the weird moments of peace between disasters. The way the stars look when the world feels like it's ending. The way your hands shake just before sunrise, knowing that the next day could be worse. But also, strangely, you feel stronger, more focused. You know now that survival out here isn't about being brave, it's about being careful, about watching what you eat, where you walk, who you trust, and how clean your shovel is. You fall asleep that night with a hand on your water pouch and a whisper of hope that tomorrow you'll all still be alive. You wake to hoofbeats and panic. Not your panic yet, but the urgent, low murmurs of your neighbours and the unmistakable clatter of oxen hooves where they shouldn't be. You scramble out from beneath your wagon, still tangled in your blanket, heart thudding in a strange rhythm. In the pre-dawn blue you see the silhouettes of animals bolting across the open plain, and someone's shouting, "The oxen!" They're spooked. You don't know why they're running or what set them off, but now you're sprinting after 2 half-ton beasts in boots that are barely tied, and a breath fogging in the cold morning air. Welcome to the wild side of the trail. The thing they don't tell you about the West is that nature is not a friendly backdrop. It's not a painting of purple mountains and gentle meadows. It's raw, untamed, and every bit as likely to kill you as disease or bad beans. That peaceful sunrise, it might come with a side of wolves. That quiet stream could be full of leeches, or worse, already claimed by something much hungrier than you. You catch one of your oxen near a cluster of low trees, wide-eyed and trembling. The other wanders in a daze, tail twitching, ribs rising and falling like bellows. Spooked by a coyote, someone says. Or maybe a mountain lion. You don't see anything, just a thin line of paw prints in the dirt and the telltale stench of fear clinging to the animals like smoke. You soothe them as best you can, rubbing their flanks, murmuring nonsense. Eventually you get them re-yoked, but the morning's been stolen. The caravan will leave late. Again. As the day wears on, the full scope of the wilderness begins to show itself. First it's the buffalo, massive herd spotted in the distance, their brown shaggy shapes moving like a single living sea across the plains. The sight is stunning, majestic even, until one of them decides to veer dangerously close. Everyone freezes, children are shushed, rifles appear like conjured objects. You don't breathe. The animal huffs once, snorts and turns away, disappearing into the herd again like a ghost of meat and muscle. Crisis averted for now, but not everything out here is awe-inspiring. Some of it is just unsettling. You come across a carcass, fresh, not human. A deer, perhaps. Its ribs are exposed, the stomach half-eaten. Flies buzz around it like a halo of rot. You look at the bite marks. Clean, too clean. Something out there has teeth, and it's not eating jerky. Your group tightens that night, wagons pulled close, rifles loaded and within arm's reach. You go to bed clutching yours like a security blanket. Here's your historical fact. Buffalo were both a blessing and a threat to pioneers. Their meat was prized, but hunting them was risky. Stampedes could destroy entire wagon trains. One recorded event described a herd that ran through a camp at night, smashing wagons and scattering supplies for miles. A real we're gonna die situation. And the quirky one, pioneers sometimes slept with pigs or goats in their wagons at night to stay warm and deter wild animals. There are multiple accounts of goats acting as makeshift alarm systems, bleating wildly when danger approached. One family even trained their pig to growl when wolves came near. His name was Winston. Winston was a hero. As for debates, there's still discussion among scholars about just how dangerous the wildlife really was. Diaries often exaggerate attacks, turning curious coyotes into mythical monsters. But bones don't lie, animal attacks did happen, especially when wagons crossed into more isolated or mountainous regions. The danger wasn't always the fangs and claws. Sometimes it was what the animals dragged away in the night. Food, shoes, even toddlers. You start to take more precautions. Food is hung from trees or buried in caches at night. Livestock is hobbled and guarded. Children are lectured repeatedly not to wander, though one small boy keeps chasing birds like he's on a personal mission from heaven. You carry your rifle more openly, even when walking. It's not just about looking brave, it's about being ready. Midway through the Samiavoy, your wagon train spots something odd. A pile of bones, arranged neatly in a circle. Too neat to be natural. There are no wagon ruts nearby, no graves. Just the eerie arrangement and a small bundle of fur in the centre. You all stand round it in silence. A few mutter about rituals. One man crosses himself. Another says, probably just kids from a local tribe, and laughs too loudly. But no one kicks the bones. You leave them unnerved. You make camp that night near a thicket, hoping the dense brush will shield you from whatever's out there. But the woods bring their own threats, bears mostly, and sometimes snakes. Someone in the party insists they saw a cougar slinking through the trees. You believe them. Not because you saw it too, but because nothing feels impossible out here anymore. The land doesn't care about your plans. It doesn't care how well you packed or how many prayers you said in Independence. Out here, you're just meat wrapped in canvas. Still, you adapt. You learn to read tracks, small impressions in the mud, tufts of fur, broken branches. You recognise the warning calls of birds, the rustle of something large in the grass. You know now that silence isn't peaceful. It's the moment right before something leaps. That night there's a scream. It's short, sharp, and stops as quickly as it started. Everyone jumps, rifles are grabbed, you stumble from your blanket, heart a drumbeat in your ears. The scream came from one of the smaller wagons, the elderly couple from Illinois. You rush over and find the woman, pale, shaking, pointing to the edge of camp. "It took our goat," she whispers. Her husband's trying to console her, but his voice is trembling too. You look where she's pointing, just a dark shape in the distance, loping away. The next day the group is quieter. No jokes at breakfast, no fiddling, just grim, focused motion. You repair a broken wheel in silence, the creak of wood and the click of metal echoing through the still air. Everyone feels it, the way the wilderness breathes around you, hungry and watching. But you keep moving, because the only way out of this place is through it. You imagined the Oregon Trail would be one long, continuous trek, a steady rhythm of wheels crunching over dirt, your boots falling into step with the horizon, day after day of forward motion. But no one warned you that you'd be spending nearly as much time not moving as you do travelling. The hard truth hits sometime during your second week, as you sit by the side of the trail for the third hour in a row, swatting flies and watching someone else's wagon wheel get mended with a level of drama usually reserved for battlefield surgery. Welcome to the hurry up and wait portion of the trail. You wake at dawn, ready to march forward, muscles aching but spirit oddly intact, and then someone's oxen are missing, or a wheel is shattered, or someone stepped on a nail and is now rolling around in agony. Sometimes it's a sudden debate about which fork in the trail to take. Other times it's just fatigue. You'll be lined up, wagons hitched, ready to roll, and then you sit, and sit, and sit. Your own emotion is the quiet inner scream echoing inside your skull. You try to be patient. Really you do. But trail time stretches like saltwater taffy in the sun. There was no clock, just the position of the sun and the feeling that this day will never, ever end. You watch a man spend 45 minutes trying to untangle a rope from his own axle. A child throws a tantrum that could win awards. Someone's cow just wandered off again, mooing into the void, and they're giving chase like it owes them money. There's something uniquely exhausting about standing still on the trail. When you're moving, at least it feels like progress. But when you're stuck, the reality of the landscape starts to close in. It's flat, it's hot, it's buzzing with flies the size of bottle caps. The prairie wind kicks up a fine grit that sneaks into your eyes, your teeth, your undergarments, everywhere. The sun's a bully and the shade, when you can find it, is already claimed by someone snoring under a wagon. And yet these slow moments are when you see your fellow travellers most clearly. They lounge on wagon tongues like sunbathing lizards, their faces slack with boredom. Some tinker endlessly with tools, others scribble in journals or patch socks with grim determination. A few manage to nap in poses that defy logic, curled on sacks of beans, draped over barrels, upside down in someone's lap. You envy their talent. One man passes time by whittling a spoon, another teaches his toddler how to whistle. You try to read a few pages of Gulliver's Travels, but the words blur from heat and distraction. Eventually, you just stare into the distance, trying to remember what trees used to look like. You haven't seen a proper one in days. Occasionally, you overhear snippets of philosophy from those as bored as you. Maybe we're not meant to get to Oregon, someone mutters. Maybe the journey is the destination. You want to punch them, just a little. By midday, you're finally on the move again, only for the oxen to slow within minutes, one of them developing what's generously called a trail limp. You've now learned the term hoof rot, and you wish you hadn't. There's also spavin, founder, and a dozen other ailments that can afflict your livestock and bring your whole life to a screeching halt. Turns out the real MVPs of this journey are your animals, and they're just as fed up as you are. Another wagon ahead loses a wheel. Again, this time it snaps so dramatically you half expect it to burst into flames. You pitch in with the repairs, because if you don't, everyone's delayed. You lift the side of the wagon while someone else wedges in a rock, and another hammers a makeshift peg into place. It's a crude patch job, but it'll hold for another 10 miles. Maybe. Here's your historical fact. The average wagon wheel could last about 200 to 300 miles before needing serious repairs or replacement. That's assuming ideal conditions, which, spoiler alert, you never have. Spare parts were essential, and many families travelled with extra wheels lashed to the sides of their wagons, like donuts on a really bad road trip. Quirky fact, some pioneers created a sort of wagon waiting kabi, or unofficial groups who passed the time playing music, telling stories or carving initials into nearby rocks. One man even built a crude checkerboard into the side of his wagon, using flattened bullets as pieces. It's unclear whether this was out of boredom or some deep need to win something on the trail. And on the scholarly side, there's a debate over whether the long delays and frequent stops were a result of poor planning, or simply unavoidable due to the unpredictable nature of the landscape. Some historians argue that most wagon parties left too early, loaded too much, and relied too heavily on untested equipment. Others counter that even the best planned caravans fell prey to the chaos of bad weather, sick animals and human drama. Basically, no one agrees, but everyone got stuck. Your own caravan develops a rhythm, 3 hours of slow progress, followed by 2 of sheer immobility, a sort of lurching dance with the trail, clumsy but inevitable. You begin to predict the moments when things will grind to a halt. A low hill, half the wagons will stall, a muddy dip, someone will lose a boot or an ox, a river in the distance. Forget moving, just break out the coffee and prepare to wait until someone builds a raft. These pauses become strange little micro-worlds. One stop turns into a baking party with everyone attempting some form of bread using flour and a campfire. Another day, someone holds a race among the children, who bolt across the prairie barefoot and yelling like tiny feral thunderclaps. You cheer them on half-heartedly, a pot of beans in one hand. But there are also the darker still moments. The ones where someone's illness forces a full stop and everyone's smiles turn brittle. Or when a wagon has to be abandoned entirely, its owners transferring what they can to others, their eyes wide with quiet panic. One man buries a chest of tools beneath a boulder, swearing he'll come back for them someday. You know he won't. That night, the wagon train doesn't even bother to set out the next morning. Too many issues, oxen too tired, children looks too sick, too much friction among the group, tempers flare. Someone shouts about poor leadership, someone else mutters about mutiny. You sit quietly and stir the beans, wondering if your ancestors will remember this as courage or utter lunacy. You fall asleep staring at the stars again, wondering how far you've come. Not far, not nearly far enough. But tomorrow maybe you'll move again. There's a particular sound that makes your stomach clench on the Oregon Trail. It's not the distant howl of a coyote, or the wet cough of a sick child. It's the sharp wooden crack that means something just snapped. A wagon tongue, a wheel rim, a spoke, doesn't matter. When you hear it, you freeze mid-step, heart stuttering, already calculating how long this new problem will delay the caravan. This time it's your own wagon. Of course it is. You rush around to the side, heart pounding, and there it is. Splintered wheel hub, cracked clean through. Your oxen, now unhitched and wide-eyed, stomp in the dirt, agitated by the sudden jolt. One of them gives you a look that says, "I told you this would happen," which is impressive for an animal that mostly communicates through drool. Everyone says the trail tests you, like it's some noble trial of the human spirit. But really, it just breaks things. Wheels, wagons, harnesses, spirits. The same way water wears down stone, the trail wears down everything you brought with you, especially your patience. It doesn't happen all at once. It chips away, one jolt, one delay, one snapped axle at a time. You gather your repair kit, now worn down to a few precious tools, and examine the damage. You've done this before, once on your cousin's wagon, twice on your neighbour's, but it never gets easier. Wood swells in the heat, iron bands rust and warp, and there's never quite enough tar to keep everything sealed. You brace the broken section with a splintered board and rope, muttering to yourself as you hammer and tie, hammer and tie. Around you the trail does what it always does, continues on indifferent to your delay. That's the real cruelty of the trail. It never stops. There's no pause button, no mercy. While you kneel in the dirt with a cracked wheel and a growing sense of doom, the wind keeps blowing, the sun keeps rising, and the rest of the caravan is already inching ahead. They'll wait a little while, maybe an hour, maybe two, but eventually someone will come back and gently say, "We can't hold up any longer." And if you're not ready, you get left behind. This time you're lucky. A younger couple from the next wagon helps you lift the frame while you slide in the brace. You grunt and strain together, sweat pouring into your eyes, but the wheel is secured. Sort of. It'll hold, probably. Maybe. Long enough to make it another 10 miles, and then you'll do it all again. Later that day, you're walking beside the wagon, testing the repair, when you catch sight of someone else's disaster. A full axle shattered, wood in pieces, wagon leaning hard to one side like it's drunk. The family sits in silence. The father stares at the damage like if he squints hard enough it'll fix itself. The mother's rocking a baby in her lap. The older son is digging a shallow pit to bury whatever they can't carry. You've seen this before. Everyone has. It's a trail ritual by now. When the wagon breaks beyond repair, the family either finds space in someone else's or gives up and turns back, assuming they have enough supplies and strength to survive the return trip. Few do. Most just leave things behind. That family's chest of linens? Abandoned. That iron stove, offloaded with a thud. You walk past them, nodding solemnly, and keep your eyes forward. Here's a historical fact that's not exactly inspiring. Nearly 1 in 10 wagons broke beyond repair on the trail, and many families lacked the skills or supplies to fix them. There were no hardware stores out here, just what you brought and what you could scavenge. If your wheel cracked and you didn't have spare spokes, you were stuck, sometimes permanently. Quirky fact, people got creative. One man famously replaced a shattered wagon wheel with a giant slice of cottonwood, carved into a crude circle. It worked, sort of, until it hit a rut and split in two. Another group used bedposts to brace a broken axle, tying them on with strips of rawhide. Desperation makes surprisingly decent engineers. And as for scholarly debate, there's long been an argument about whether the wagons used on the trail were truly suited for the journey. The standard prairie schooner design was light, sure, but it wasn't built to survive 2,000 miles of punishment. Some historians argue they were woefully underprepared, too cheaply built, and structurally flimsy. Others claim that pioneers did the best they could with what they had, and that it was always going to be a gamble no matter the wagon quality. Back in camp that night, your wagon creaks ominously as you settle in beside it. You lie awake on your pallet, staring at the wooden frame above you, and wondering which piece will betray you next. You know the wheel is a ticking time bomb. You know the canvas top has a growing tear, and you know that one of the oxen has started limping slightly, which means you're probably due for another crisis tomorrow. You're not alone in your paranoia. Around the fire, conversations now revolve around repairs. Who's got spare grease? Anyone have a few extra nails? Did anyone bring actual carpentry skills? Or is everyone just faking it like you are? The answers are usually no, yes, and definitely the latter. The funny part, if there's anything funny left, is that you start to bond over it. Misery loves company, and trail repairs are the great equalizer. No matter how prepared or rich someone was back in Missouri, they're just another sweaty, exhausted amateur mechanic now, pounding in wooden pegs and hoping it holds until sundown. You trade tricks too. Someone swears by soaking rope in bacon grease to make it last longer. Another swears at that person when the rope slips loose the next day. One woman reveals she's been using strips of her old corset to lash down cargo. It's tough, flexible, and already full of broken dreams. You admire her resourcefulness and make a mental note to sacrifice your own undergarments if things get desperate. You fall asleep that night with the image of your wheel seared into your brain. You dream of spokes snapping like brittle bones, of your wagon crumbling into a pile of wood and flour sacks. You wake up with the sun in your eyes and the familiar stiffness in your back, and then you hear it again, that creak, the wheel whispering to you like a ghost. Soon. And you sigh Get up and get ready to fix it. Again. You can pinpoint the exact moment your trail diet starts to unravel. It's around week 3, when you open a flour sack and find it crawling with tiny black bugs. You stare at the squirming mass in numb horror, then shake the sack violently as if that'll magically fix it. It doesn't. You pick out as many as you can, mutter a few curse words, and then cook with it anyway. Because out here, the line between edible and disgusting is thinner than the soup you're about to make. Food on the trail is not a pleasure. It is a requirement. You eat to keep walking. You chew because not doing so leads to dizziness, weakness, and worse. The early days were full of variety: salt pork, beans, hardtack, rice, dried apples. You even remember eating pie once before someone dropped the last of the preserves trying to chase a goose out of their wagon. Now, it's beans, flour, and what might be squirrel, though no one's asking too many questions. Every family rationed carefully, or at least they tried to. You remember sitting around the fire with your little sack of supplies, counting spoonfuls like you were handling gold dust. 2 scoops of rice, a pinch of salt, just enough lard to make it stick together in a sad little ball. But rationing only works when everyone's healthy. And on the trail, nobody's healthy for long. Sick people need broth. Kids need snacks. You use more food than you planned, and suddenly that 6-month supply you smugly packed back in Independence is looking suspiciously light. You've started foraging when you can: wild onions, bitter greens, the occasional lucky bush of berries. Sometimes you find mushrooms, and someone from another wagon swears they're safe. You boil them in stew and wait to see who starts convulsing. No one does. That night feels like a victory. But most days you eat the same thing: flour and water, fried on a skillet until it barely resembles a tortilla, then dipped in bean sludge. If you're lucky, there's a shred of dried meat to add a bit of chew. If not, well, there's always imagination. One afternoon, a group of kids catches a rabbit. They parade it through camp like they just took down a buffalo, proudly holding it by the ears. You help clean it, thankful for fresh meat, even if the thing's barely bigger than your boot. That night, everyone gets a spoonful of rabbit stew, and for a moment it almost tastes like home. Then the rationing gets tighter. You're walking longer hours and burning more calories, but the food is dwindling. You see it in the way people chew, slowly savouring every bite. In the way people eye each other's plates, not with greed but longing. Your kids are getting skinnier. You're getting snappier. Hunger crawls into your bones and settles there. Here's your historical fact. On average, pioneers needed 2,000 to 3,000 calories a day just to keep up with the physical exertion of the trail. But most didn't eat that much. Rations were usually 500 calories or less, especially once the journey wore on and supplies ran low. Malnutrition was common. Scurvy, caused by lack of vitamin C, ran rampant, softening gums, loosening teeth, and turning joints into screaming bags of pain. Quirky fact: some desperate souls tried boiling their leather shoes to make broth. Yes, really. The leather was usually tanned with animal fat and chemicals, making it technically edible if you ignored the flavour, texture, and intense shame. One traveller swore by stewing old saddle straps with wild garlic. "It tastes like regret," he reportedly said, but he lived to tell the tale. Scholars still debate whether most pioneers packed properly for the trail. Journals show a wide range. Some families were meticulous, bringing carefully measured sacks of flour, beans, bacon, and even dried fruit. Others showed up with sacks of candy, bottles of brandy, and not a single potato. Some argue that travel guides of the time were misleading, emphasising comfort foods over practical ones. Others blame optimism. People simply believed they'd restock easily along the way. They didn't. Speaking of restocking, trading posts and forts become lifelines. When word spreads that Fort Kearney is a day away, the whole caravan gets a boost. You imagine fresh bread, maybe butter. You try not to think about bacon, it hurts too much. But the closer you get, the more people start whispering warnings. The prices are steep. They're running out. Don't expect much. And they're right. When you arrive, the fort is half-stocked and fully overpriced. Flour costs double. Salted meat is stringy and foul-smelling, but you buy what you can anyway because the alternative is hunger. One man sells his boots for a barrel of molasses, another trades a rifle for coffee beans. You swap a cracked mirror and 3 spools of thread for half a ham that smells only slightly like feet. That night you fry it over a smoky fire and convince yourself it's delicious. But some things can't be bought. You dream about eggs, about real bread, not the dense pan-fried bricks you've been choking down. You dream about peaches in syrup, mashed potatoes, cake. You wake up chewing air. Once, in desperation, you lick a spoon just to remember the taste of lard. It's not your proudest moment. And yet, despite everything, there's a weird camaraderie in suffering together. Food becomes a shared obsession. Someone finds a patch of wild mint, and you all descend on it like bears. A child discovers a few berries, and a line forms behind them like it's a 5-star buffet. You cook together, share leftovers, if there are any, and trade recipes that are more wishful thinking than anything else. Someday, someone says, I'm going to bake a real pie with butter and sugar. Everyone sighs like they're remembering a lost love. Then one morning, disaster. One of the wagons topples while crossing a ridge, and a barrel of flour bursts open. It spills down the slope, a tragic avalanche of white powder, vanishing into the dirt. You all stand there stunned. A grown man drops to his knees and tries to scoop it back into a bucket with his bare hands. No one laughs. You help him, because out here flour is worth more than gold. That night you eat slowly, chewing each bite like it owes you something. You stare into the fire, belly still aching, and wonder how long you can keep doing this. But when someone passes you a sliver of dried apple, you smile, because it's sweet, because you didn't expect it, and because tomorrow you'll walk again. You'll eat what you have, and you'll hope, always hope, that the next bite will be better. You hear it before you see it, the low rhythmic roar, like distant thunder trapped in a box. Everyone perks up, the wagon slow, even the oxen seem to pause. You follow the sound to its source, cresting a gentle rise, and there it is, a river, wide and slow-moving, slicing through the earth like a lazy blue vein. It doesn't look especially menacing. In fact, it almost looks inviting, glinting in the afternoon sun. You allow yourself the luxury of hope. Maybe this one will be easy. It won't be. River crossings are the true test of your will and also of your wagon's structural integrity. This one, the Platte, or maybe the Loo depending on who you ask, is just wide enough to be annoying and just deep enough to be terrifying. The first problem is figuring out how deep it really is. A few men wade in, pants hiked up, poking the riverbed with sticks like they're afraid it might bite. One of them goes in too far and slips. When he stumbles out coughing and soaked, the group collectively groans. Gonna need to float it, someone says. No one wants to float it. Floating means sealing everything inside the wagon, wrapping the canvas tight and trusting that your home on wheels won't become a waterlogged coffin. It means unpacking anything precious, clothing, food, people, and ferrying them over by hand or raft, one precarious trip at a time. It also means praying your oxen don't panic halfway across and drag your belongings down with them. The second problem is that floating is a generous term. These aren't boats. They're wagons. Wagons with gaps between the planks and rusted iron parts. You saw one go under just last week, lost to a surprise current and the poor planning. The family was lucky. They swam. Their bedding didn't. You start waterproofing. You smear tar along the seams, lash barrels inside tight, and use oilskin to wrap the food stores. You pull the heaviest items, stove, tools, extra flour, out and drag them around the riverbank. Then you look to the oxen. They'll have to swim. You tie ropes to their yokes and hope they're feeling brave today. When it's your turn, your stomach drops. The current looks faster now, even though you know it's probably just nerves. You wade in with the animals first, gripping the lead rope tight. The cold hits your knees, then your waist, and suddenly the river feels a lot less charming. The oxen snort, hesitant. You pull gently, whispering nonsense encouragement. Come on, Butterscotch, don't you dare drown me. Somehow you make it across, soaked and shivering, but alive. Then it's the wagon's turn. You and two others ease it into the water, hearts pounding. It starts to float, bobbing awkwardly, swaying like it's had too much to drink. The oxen swim, the current tugs, the wheels catch on a submerged rock, and the whole thing tilts dangerously. You yell. Someone throws a rope. For one awful second you think you're going to lose everything. But then the wagon rights itself with a violent lurch and drifts forward. You pull it ashore and collapse beside it, panting, every muscle in your body screaming. Your hands are blistered from the rope, your boots are filled with river silt. But the wagon is intact, your flour is dry, and most importantly, no one died. Here's your historical fact. River crossings were one of the deadliest parts of the Oregon Trail. Drowning was the second leading cause of death, right behind disease. Some rivers were hundreds of feet wide with strong currents, and without bridges, every crossing was a gamble. Even experienced travellers often lost wagons, livestock, and occasionally entire families to unexpected accidents. Quirky fact? Some pioneers brought inflatable hides or bull boats, frames made from willow branches covered with buffalo skin, just for river crossings. These worked surprisingly well if you didn't mind sitting in a stinking hair-covered water bowl while clinging to your biscuit barrel. One woman reportedly floated her wagon's contents across in a wash tub. Twice, she became something of a trail legend. And the debate? Scholars still disagree on how often pioneers chose to ferry their wagons across rivers versus floating them. Some argue that most groups avoided floating at all costs using rafts or even building temporary bridges. Others suggest that the time and resources to build a raft were usually too great, making floating the wagon the more common, if riskier, option. Either way, the odds were never great. After the crossing, the camp sets up nearby. Everyone's too tired to go further. Fires are lit, soggy clothes hung on wagon wheels, and wet boots removed with pained grunts. The kids play along the shore, throwing rocks and chasing frogs, as if they hadn't just witnessed several near-death experiences. You check your supplies. A few sacks of flour are damp around the edges, but salvageable. Your rifle is fine. Your coffee grounds? Slightly soggy. You grieve quietly. Still, it could have been worse. You walk past a neighbour's wagon and see a crate of shattered jars, pickled beets oozing down the wood in tragic purple streaks. The woman who owned them looks like she might cry. Someone tries to comfort her, but she just walks away. That was her winter supply. You say nothing, just keep walking. That evening, someone pulls out a fiddle and a few people actually dance. It's strange seeing laughter after so much fear, but maybe that's why it happens, relief that for once you made it. That night, the food tastes better than it should. Just beans and dry bread, but they go down easy, washed down with river-chilled water and that weird feeling of triumph. You feel like you passed a test. The trail tried to swallow you and you crawled out the other side, coughing and soaked, but still standing. The next morning you pack up again. The river lies behind you, quiet now, like it never tried to kill you at all. You give it one last look before climbing onto the wagon tongue. The oxen grunt, the wheels groan, the trail stretches forward. And so you go. You've heard people say that the prairie looks the same day after day, like some kind of stretched out wallpaper of grass and sky. But after a few hundred miles of walking it, you know better. It doesn't stay the same. It feels the same. The repetition grinds into your bones. Greenish-yellow grass, pale blue sky, and that ever-present layer of dust swirling at ankle level. But under that sameness, change brews. Subtle at first. A cough that lingers too long, a child who won't eat, a man who hasn't stood up from his bedroll in 2 days. That's when you start hearing it whispered through the wagons. There's fever in the camp. You don't know exactly what kind it is. Nobody does. Out here, all fevers get lumped together under vague names like trail fever or plain sickness. Sometimes it's dysentery again. Other times it's cholera, or typhoid, or that catch-all horror ague, which just means they're shaking and we don't know why. Whatever this is, it's fast and brutal. 3 people are down by sunset. By the next morning, 2 more. You begin to wonder if the river you just crossed left something behind in everyone's guts. You do what you can, you boil water, scrub the dishes with ash, hang wet clothes in the sun. A woman from another wagon suggests burning dried sage around the sick, which might help or might just make the whole wagon smell like a fireplace. Either way, you do it. You soak cloths in vinegar and press them to foreheads. You mix a bit of whiskey with river water and call it medicine. Someone starts praying louder than usual. The sick groan, sweat pouring down their faces. You recognise the pattern now. It starts with the chills, then a fever so high they stop making sense. They mutter nonsense or speak in long-forgotten languages. Some call out for mothers or who've been dead for years, then the shaking. And then for some, the silence. You try to stay strong, keep walking, keep hauling. But the air feels thick with dread. Everyone's a little quieter, a little less patient. The kids don't play as much. The campfires feel colder. No one sings. You overhear 2 men arguing over whether to press on or rest. One insists the trail is safer than sitting still. The other says the sick need time to recover. A third voice snaps, "You think the trail cares what we need?" You don't vote. You're too busy hauling water, feeding broth to your wagon mate who hasn't stood in a day and a half. You clean a cloth in silence, watching their chest rise and fall with effort. You tell yourself they'll pull through. They always have, until they don't. Here's your historical fact. Illnesses like cholera and typhoid were rampant on the Oregon Trail, especially in the warm months. Unsanitary conditions, shared water sources, and tight living quarters created the perfect storm. Once an outbreak began, it could tear through a wagon train in days. Entire families were lost between river crossings. Quirky fact? Some travellers swore by prairie cures that ranged from mildly ineffective to outright dangerous. Common treatments included turpentine, tobacco smoke enemas, and drinking mercury-laced blue mass pills. One widely believed remedy for fever was to bury the patient up to their neck in cool soil. If they didn't die of exposure, they might have recovered, or just caught pneumonia instead. Debate-wise, scholars are still trying to determine how many deaths went unrecorded due to improvised burials and the sheer volume of travel. Diaries and ledgers offer only glimpses, often with vague notations like, "We lost 2 last night," or "buried another by the trail." Some argue the true death toll could be twice as high as estimates suggest. Others think it's impossible to know, disease didn't leave tidy records. As the days crawl by, the sick either improve or vanish. You dig 2 more graves. This time you help build a little rock mound over one so the animals won't dig it up. You place a makeshift cross on top, a broken wagon spoke tied together with twine. The woman buried there was someone's aunt. You barely spoke to her, but the way her niece cried over her, that sticks with you. When the fever passes, it doesn't leave relief. It leaves emptiness. Places where people used to sit, plates that don't need filling anymore. Everyone walks slower now, like they're carrying the ghosts of the ones they've lost. And maybe they are. You feel it too, a weight in your chest that's got nothing to do with packs or miles. And then the weird part, life keeps going. A boy chases a grasshopper and laughs like he's never heard someone die. A couple gets engaged by the fire one evening, the man proposing with a ring carved from bone. Someone else finds a patch of wild strawberries and brings them back, passing them out like treasure. You get 3, you eat them slowly, trying to remember what joy used to taste like. And just like that, the caravan begins to breathe again. Slowly, hesitantly, one foot in front of the other, until a new kind of fear arrives. One of the wagons spots smoke on the horizon, not from a fire, but a signal. Vertical plumes, rising in deliberate succession. A few people tense immediately. "Indians," someone whispers. The word is thick with worry, but also with ignorance, because so far the only Indigenous people you've met have been curious, cautious, and mostly unimpressed with your struggling caravan. You traded for jerky and moccasins at a distance, nodding, unsure of how to act. No violence, no danger, just wary strangers on their own land watching you stumble through it. But still, the signal rattles people. Old prejudices rise up like blisters. Men load their rifles. Women clutch their children. Someone ties a bowie knife to the wagon's side like that'll scare off a war party. The wagon master urges calm, but the air is tight. You don't know what's coming. Maybe nothing, maybe just more prairie. That night the fever seems far away, but the unease stays. You lie in your bedroll half asleep, listening to the creak of canvas in the wind and the soft murmurs of your companions. Somewhere out there the land shifts and breathes and watches. The fever took your strength, but the trail keeps going, and so must you. There's a change in the mood after the fever breaks. Tense, quiet, a kind of collective holding of breath. No one says it aloud, but it's clear. The trail is entering new territory, and not just in miles. You're moving deeper into lands you were warned about, where maps turn vague and rumour takes over. Every hill feels like it's hiding something. Every smoke signal in the distance is met with silence and side-eyes. Everyone becomes a little more cautious, a little more suspicious. The word Indians hangs in the air like thunder you haven't heard yet. You've already passed a few small Indigenous camps, distant figures across the prairie watching. The first time you saw them, it sent a jolt through your chest, not out of fear, but out of sheer not knowing. You were raised on stories, scalping, ambushes, arrows through the night. But what you saw were people, families, a group sitting beneath a canvas tent eating, 2 children chasing each other, one man on horseback staring calmly at your train as you passed. No weapons drawn, no drama, just observation. And yet the myths are louder than the facts. That's how fear works. So when your wagon train approaches a cluster of teepees one afternoon, the response is mixed. Some people tighten their grips on rifles. Others prepare small trade goods, cloth, buttons, beads. hoping this will be like last time. Quiet, maybe even friendly. You're somewhere near Pawnee or Oto territory now, though no one is quite sure where one nation's land ends and another's begins. The government drew some lines, but they never asked anyone else about them. A small group approaches, 4 men and 2 women, draped in hides and woven cloth, mounted on horses that look like they were born from the wind. They were not armed, or if they are, it's subtle. Their faces are calm, unreadable. The wagon master steps forward, hat in hand, offering the universal peace language of trade: sugar, tobacco, salt. One of the women nods. She steps down from her horse and reaches into a satchel, producing dried meat and a pair of handmade moccasins. The trade begins. No one speaks the same language, but gestures do enough. You give them a tin cup, they offer a leather pouch. A boy from your group reaches out to touch one of their horses, and the animal flicks its ears but doesn't move away. Laughter trickles out on both sides. Not a flood, but a stree-horn, something human. Still not everyone's convinced. You hear muttering behind you, words like savages and ambush. The man from Kentucky who never shuts up says something about arrows and smallpox. You want to turn around and ask him where his shoes came from, since those sure look like Lakota's design. But you let it go. The trail's long, idiocy has time to wear itself out. You watch as one of the Pawnee men points westward, makes a motion with his hand, zigzag, up and down. Mountains, you think? He's warning you. The pass ahead is rough. He points to your oxen and makes a tired gesture. You nod, grateful. Even when you don't speak the language, you understand the weight of kindness. Here's your historical fact. While popular culture paints Indigenous interactions on the Oregon Trail as violent, most were peaceful and often helpful. Native tribes frequently traded with emigrants, offering food, directions, and animal care. In many cases, the real aggression came from the settlers, not the other way around. Treaties were ignored, land was taken, and retaliation became inevitable. Quirky fact: some pioneers reported receiving directions from Indigenous travellers using carefully arranged rocks or bundles of sticks as trail markers. Others were guided by tribal members for small fees. One journal tells of a young boy who led an entire wagon train through a safe mountain pass in exchange for a bright blue shirt. As for scholarly debate, historians continue to wrestle with the narrative of Indian hostility on the trail. Some argue that the fear was stoked intentionally by newspapers and officials to justify land seizure and military expansion. Others suggest that tensions were simply the natural result of too many people crossing into territory without consent or context. The truth lies, as it often does, in the middle. Cooperation existed. So did conflict, but the stereotypes? Mostly built from anxiety and bad headlines. Back in your wagon circle, the atmosphere is complicated. The trade has gone smoothly, no signs of danger. But as the Pawnee group rides off, one of them glances back, a look you can't quite read. Something between pity and warning. That night, the caravan eats well. The dried meat is smoky and rich, better than anything you've had in weeks. But no one talks much. Everyone keeps glancing into the darkness beyond the wagons, like they're waiting for the next thing to go wrong. You lie awake and think about the woman with the leather satchel, about the way she looked at your wagon, your cracked wheel, your bent axle, your tired family, and offered you meat anyway. Not because she had to, not because she owed you, but because she saw you, saw the struggle and gave what she could. You don't write that down in your journal. It feels too big, too different from the stories you were raised on. You don't have the words for it yet. The next day the land changes again. More hills, the kind of trail that chews up oxen hooves and spits them out as blood-stained ruts. One of the children rides in the wagon because her legs are covered in blisters. You see a fresh set of tracks beside yours. Hoof prints that didn't belong to anyone in the caravan. Someone's watching. You don't feel threatened, just noticed. You pass another small camp. This one empty, though clearly recently used. Ashes still warm, feathers tied to branches, tools set neatly against a tree. You walk quietly. No one touches anything, out of respect or fear, or both. Later, someone carves a message into a cottonwood. No trouble here. You don't know if it's meant for other pioneers or whoever might be following. Maybe it's just a plea, a hope. That night, the wind howls through the wagons like it's trying to tell you something. You pull your blanket tighter and listen. Out here, everyone's a stranger, but not all strangers are enemies. You think you've learnt the rules of the trail. Wake up early, boil the coffee, yoke the oxen, walk until your knees hate you, and pray the wagon doesn't tip. It's a cruel routine, sure, but at least it's predictable. Until it isn't. One day the skies change. Not gradually, like a polite little storm on the horizon, no. The wind kicks up out of nowhere, the sky turns a kind of bruised green, and the temperature drops like a bad omen. You're caught mid-mile with nothing around but sagebrush and anxiety. You don't have time to pitch camp properly. The wind tears through the canvas like it's trying to peel the wagons apart. Dust blows sideways, thick as smoke, stinging your eyes and coating your teeth in grit. You yell, but your voice vanishes into the storm. Someone's bonnet flies past you like a sad little ghost. A barrel of beans tips over. You watch, in slow-motion horror, as a week's worth of food rolls into a gully. There's lightning too, flashes that illuminate the prairie in brutal strobe-light bursts. You grab whatever you can, your coat, your child, your skillet if you're lucky, and huddle beneath the wagon. The oxen moan and stomp, barely restrained. The canvas above you flaps like a sail in open water, and for a second you wonder if the whole contraption's going to take flight with you in it. The rain starts sharp and sideways, needles of ice-cold water slicing across the prairie. You're soaked in minutes. It ends as quickly as it began. One moment you're in the middle of a tornado's bad mood, the next it's dead calm. The silence after is worse somehow, like the world forgot to turn the volume back on. You crawl out, soaked and shaking, and take stock. 2 wagons have toppled. A fire kit is gone. 1 ox has bolted, gone into the grasslands, never to be seen again. But everyone's alive, barely. The next day you're moving again, slower than before. The storm wrung the energy out of the caravan like water from a dishcloth. People aren't talking much. One man just keeps muttering about his tent pole and how it never stood right, not even in Missouri. You keep your eyes on the sky now, flinching every time a cloud passes overhead. But if the storms are bad, the heat is worse. You reach the part of the trail where there's no shade, not a tree in sight, not even a tall bush to fake it. Just prairie grass that sizzles under the sun and wind that feels like it's blowing straight from the mouth of a furnace. You can't drink enough water. Your lips crack, your skin peels, the oxen pant like dogs, tongues hanging, eyes rolling back. One day you find a man collapsed beside the trail. His hands are curled like claws, his lips black with thirst. He makes a sound when you lift his head, but no words come out. He doesn't survive the night. You bury him beside a dry creek bed. No cross this time, just a stone cairn and a small circle of silence. Everyone's too tired for ceremony. Here's your historical fact. Weather was one of the most dangerous, underestimated aspects of trail life. Blizzards could strike in May. Heat waves could scorch entire sections of the trail in June and July. Thunderstorms often triggered flash floods, especially in low valleys. Many wagons were lost to sudden, violent weather, washed away or shattered by wind before anyone could react. Quirky fact, some trail diaries mention people tying their belongings to trees during high wind, believing it would anchor the storm. One particularly inventive family made a kind of anchor from filled flour sacks tied to wagon wheels to keep them from rolling in the wind. Another group claimed their secret was sleeping under the wagon with iron cookware on top of them, as if cast iron was nature's security blanket. And of course there's the historical debate. How prepared were emigrants for trail weather? Some argue that many of the emigrant guides, those little printed how-to books sold back east, grossly underestimated the dangers. They painted the West as a mild, sunny paradise, omitting minor details like Tornado Alley or hail the size of walnuts. Others contend that the pioneers were warned, but either ignored the warnings or believed they'd be among the lucky ones. Spoiler. No one was lucky out here, just stubborn. Things don't improve. A few days after the heatwave, a hailstorm crashes over your train like it's auditioning for the Book of Exodus. 1 minute it's a cloudy afternoon. The next, ice is falling from the sky in chunks the size of goose eggs. The sound is deafening, pinging off wagons, cracking wooden crates, denting the tin wash basin you forgot to tie down. You grab the kids and huddle again, your only protection a fraying quilt and sheer denial. When it ends, the trail looks like a battlefield. Smashed tools, shredded tarps, one of the oxen has a bleeding cut on its flank. A few people joke, trying to laugh it off. Well, at least we've got ice for the lemonade. But no one really smiles. After that, the cold creeps in. Not a full frost, but a drop in temperature that sends you scrambling for coats you thought you wouldn't need till October. You learn the layers game fast. Too few and you're shivering. Too many and you sweat through them, which makes you cold again when the sun dips behind the hills. The hardest part is sleeping. On cold nights, the fire burns low and every blanket is too thin. You press close to your family under the wagon, knees to chins, breath fogging in the air. If you're lucky, someone's goat crawls in beside you. Warm, stinky, judgmental, but undeniably helpful. One night, a woman's baby won't stop crying. She walks back and forth by the fire, murmuring softly, bouncing him in her arms. The rest of the camp tries to pretend they're not listening, not worrying, not wondering if that baby has the same fever that killed 3 others last week. But in the morning, the crying has stopped. And so has the baby. The burial is silent. No words, just a doll left beside a tiny grave. You can't cry anymore. The wind has taken your tears. And still, the trail moves forward. That's the real cruelty of it. There are no rain checks out here. No snow days. No time to stop and mourn. Or even rest. The weather comes, punishes and leaves, and you keep walking. You walk through rain, through hail, through mud that swallows boots and hearts alike. Because what else is there? You pass the place where the baby is buried 3 days later. The grave is already fading into the grass. You lose track of how many days you've been walking, which sounds like a line from a melodrama, but no, it's just life now. The sun rises, you get up, you put one foot in front of the other, and by the time the moon shows up again, you've forgotten what it was like to sit still. What makes it harder isn't just the monotony or the miles. It's the fact that you're not the only one enduring it. Your kids are right there with you, boots too big, clothes too small, and faces that already look older than when you left Missouri. They don't complain much anymore. That's the worst part. At the start of the trail, the children were full of questions and excitement. Everything was new, the birds, the wildflowers, the thrill of riding in the wagon, for 5 minutes before they realised how uncomfortable it was. You remember your youngest collecting shiny pebbles from the road and calling them trail jewels. She kept them in a little pouch, proud as a prospector. Now that pouch is empty. She stopped picking them up weeks ago. Children on the trail walk just like the adults. You hoped they wouldn't have to, but hope doesn't get you far when your oxen are exhausted and every extra pound feels like betrayal. So they walk. Tiny boots kicking up dust, small hands gripping the sides of wagons for balance. They grow quieter, more serious. They understand in a way that makes your chest ache that playtime is over. That's not to say they don't try. When the train pauses, they run off into the tall grass, chasing grasshoppers or trying to catch birds with their bare hands. They make up games with sticks and stones, laugh at each other's terrible impressions of adults, and once, briefly, they manage a game of pretend school, where one bossy child teaches the others how to spell Missouri and mispronounces it every time. But it fades. The farther you go, the less room there is for childhood. You start noticing little things, lips dry and cracked, cheeks hollowing out. One of the boys gets a splinter that turns into a festering sore. Another limps from a twisted ankle. You carry your youngest for half a mile before your back gives out. Then you just hold her hand and tell stories as you both trudge forward, pretending your feet don't feel like splintered logs. Here's your historical fact. It's estimated that up to 50,000 children made the journey west along the Oregon Trail. Many were under 10. Most walked the entire way, some 2,000 miles, alongside their families. Diaries often note that the children age quickly, taking on chores and responsibilities well beyond their years. Quirky fact, some children brought pets on the trail, cats, dogs, even birds in cages. One boy famously travelled with a pet turtle tied to a string. Another girl insisted on bringing her pet goat, which ended up pulling a miniature cart behind the main wagon. These animals were often more than pets. They were comfort, distraction, and in some cases, heat sources during cold nights. And sometimes, heartbreakingly, emergency food. Scholars often debate the psychological toll of the journey on children. There aren't many first-hand accounts from kids themselves. Most were too young to write about it or too busy surviving. But references in adult journals describe children becoming increasingly quiet, obedient, and sometimes ill-tempered, or withdrawn. The loss of siblings, friends, pets, and even toys created a strange and painful emotional landscape. They didn't just cross a continent, they aged decades on the way. You see it happen in your own family. Your middle child, once the loudest, now speaks in a whisper. Your son, 9 years old and convinced he's the man of the house, has started checking the oxen's hooves every morning. He's proud of it. even though you secretly redo his work after he walks away. Sometimes you catch them watching the adults too closely, taking in the worry, the calculations about rations, the quiet conversations about who's not going to make it. You try to shield them, but the trail doesn't allow secrets. Everything is out in the open, baked in the sun and aired out in dust. When someone dies, they see the burial. When a fight breaks out, they hear every word. When someone gets sick, they smell the sickness. And yet they endure. One day, a storm strands the caravan for half a day. You're stuck beneath the wagons again. Everything's soaked, spirits flat. The kids are cold, restless. Then, out of nowhere, your daughter starts humming. A soft tune, nothing special. A lullaby from back home. Then another kid joins in. And another. By the time the storm fades, half the children are singing in thin, reedy voices, like ghosts who forgot they were supposed to be sad. You don't cry, but your throat closes up like it's trying to remember. The next day, they're back to walking. There's no other option. Some ride for a mile or two and someone gives up a spot in the wagon. But mostly they plod along, dust-caked, sunburned and heartbreakingly brave. You hear them whispering sometimes about home, about what they'll do in Oregon, about the friends they miss. One boy says he'll build a house with 2 chimneys. Another swears he'll open a candy shop and never charge a single penny. The dreams are small, but they're still alive. That's something. You try to keep their minds busy. You teach them songs, tell them stories you half remember from books you don't have anymore. You point at clouds and pretend they're shapes. Anything to keep them walking, moving, believing that this endless trail will lead somewhere worth arriving at. One afternoon you find a rag doll lying in the grass beside the trail. It's dirty, half crushed, one button eye missing. You pick it up and carry it for miles, wondering which child lost it and whether they cried. When you pass a family with a little girl about the right age, you offer it gently. She nods, silent, takes it like it's made of porcelain, and holds it against her chest for the rest of the day. You don't say anything else. You just keep walking beside her, quietly, as the sun sets behind the wagon wheels and the trail stretches out ahead. By now, you've figured out that the phrase "a woman's work is never done" wasn't meant to be a metaphor. It's just a grim and accurate daily schedule. Out here, it's not just never done. It's never even pausing. From the moment the sky starts turning pale behind the hills, long before the oxen are yoked and the wheels start rolling, the women of the trail are already knee-deep in chores. And yes, that includes you. Your day begins in a rush of cold water and hotter tempers. You're up before the sun, coaxing a fire into being, with damp twigs and whatever scraps of kindling haven't already been turned into makeshift wheel wedges. You mix flour and water with numb fingers, slapping together yet another round of trail bread, which is a generous name for the chewy, half-burned discs your family eats without complaint. Mostly because they've stopped expecting flavour. Then you pack. Again. Everything comes out of the wagon at night. Everything goes back in come morning. It's a process, and it never gets easier. The bedding is heavy, the food barrels are awkward, and your arms are sore from yesterday's bumpy miles. The children need shoes tied, water bottles filled, and at least one of them will try to walk off barefoot and shirtless if you look away for more than 10 seconds. Someone's already crying, you don't even ask why anymore. When the wagons finally get moving, there's no rest. You walk alongside because every seat is filled with either sick relatives, valuable supplies or livestock that simply refuses to be tethered elsewhere. While the men curse at the oxen and argue about trail forks, you're thinking about dinner, water rations, and how much firewood you might be able to gather by sundown. You've started recognizing the good shrubs, those dry, brittle ones that burn quick and hot, and even the kids know to collect buffalo chips with minimal whining. It's a strange life when you can evaluate animal dung by texture and burn potential. You thought the trail would be about hard work and survival, sure, but you didn't expect the relentlessness. The men may lead the wagons, but it's the women who keep the machine turning. You cook, clean, sew, mend, soothe, nurse, and sometimes, quietly, dig graves. There is no applause, no thanks. Just the knowledge that if you stop, everything else does too. Someone's baby has a fever. You offer the last of your willow bark tea, brewed from a handful of stripped twigs you collected 2 days ago. You don't say that you are saving it for your own daughter, who's been coughing at night. It's an unspoken code, help where you can, because no one knows who'll be the one needing it tomorrow. You think about your own mother, back in Missouri, who would have called this madness, but she never walked the trail. Here's your historical fact. Women played crucial roles in the success, or failure, of wagon trains. Though often left out of official records their labour was essential, They managed food supplies, treated illness, taught children, and even helped repair wagons. Some led entire families west after their husbands died or disappeared. Their names are carved into trail history, sometimes literally, scratched into stone with the tips of sewing needles. Quirky fact: many women brought family heirlooms or comfort items from home. Fine china, embroidered pillows, even heavy iron skillets that served no practical purpose, but made the journey anyway. One woman hauled a full-length mirror across the plains. When her wagon overturned, she refused to leave it behind. It shattered. She kept the frame. And here's the scholarly debate. Did the trail empower women or reinforce their domestic limitations? Some argue that the harsh demands of the journey blurred gender roles. Women drove wagons, hunted game, and made executive decisions when men couldn't. Others believe the trail simply extended the home into the wilderness, chaining women to endless domestic duty under harsher conditions. The truth, as always, is probably both. In your case, empowerment feels like a sick joke. You're stronger than you've ever been, yes. Your hands are rough, your arms firm, your skin sun-hardened, but you're exhausted in ways that sleep doesn't touch. You've seen what happens when a mother collapses from heat or hunger. Everything stops, so you keep going. You smile for the children, hum while you cook, and whisper bedtime stories about the green hills of Oregon, even though you're not sure those hills exist. There are good moments too, little ones. You laugh with the other women while doing laundry in a muddy stream, soap made from ashes and animal fat leaving your hands dry as paper. You share gossip that's almost entirely made up. You trade recipes no one has ingredients for. Apple pie, roast duck, buttered biscuits. Just saying the words feels like magic. One woman draws a cake in the dirt and everyone stares at it like it's a vision. Sometimes you tell stories while you walk. The children gather close, their faces flushed and eager, grateful for something, anything, to break the endless rhythm of boots on dirt. You tell them about queens and dragons, sea voyages and cities full of light. You don't mention that you've never seen any of those things yourself. Doesn't matter. Out here, fantasy is a form of survival. One night a woman gives birth beside a wagon. The labour is long, the pain sharp. You boil water, tear strips of cloth and murmur encouragement while trying not to show your own fear. Baby arrives in silence, the mother in tears. You wrap the child, hand him over, and then go back to stirring the beans. The next morning you rise like always. You roll up bedding, brush dirt off your skirt, check for blisters on the kids' feet. You lift the coffee pot with hands that tremble only a little. Another day, another mile. Sometimes as you walk you let yourself dream. About a real bed, a house with 4 walls, a quiet afternoon where the loudest thing is a bird in a tree you actually planted, maybe a porch, a rocking chair, and no more wagons. But for now, you stir the pot, you sew another shirt, you wipe another child's face, and when the men talk about the real work of the trail, you nod and smile, and don't bother correcting them. Because while they conquer miles, you're conquering everything else. You stop counting the graves after the first dozen. At first, each one stabs you, a pang of grief, a sharp reminder that someone's journey ended right there in the dirt. But somewhere along the trail, the edges of mourning dull, and the sadness settles into something quieter. You still feel it, of course. The heaviness never leaves, but you learn how to carry it alongside your water jug and firewood bundle. The graves are everywhere now, sometimes marked with stones, sometimes just a wooden plank stuck in the ground, a name carved with a pocket knife. Other times there's nothing. No marker, no date, just a disturbed patch of earth, already losing its shape to the wind. You pass one every few miles. The kids don't ask anymore. They used to. Who was that? What happened? But now they just walk a little faster, eyes down. When you help bury someone, there's always a ritual, even if it's makeshift. A few words, a hymn if someone remembers one, a silent moment, heads bowed. You've lost people from your wagon, and you've helped bury strangers. The grief hits different when you're the one holding the shovel. There's no pastor, no linen, no promises of a better place. Just dirt and loss and the pressure to finish before sundown. Some graves have flowers, some have nothing. A few are dug with care, lined with stones to keep animals out. Others are rushed, shallow, filled with guilt and urgency. You've had to leave graves behind mid-shovel because wolves were circling or thunderclouds were moving too fast. Once, you buried a woman's body with her bonnet pulled down over her face and only a few lines of verse murmured between sobs. You didn't know her name, and yet you remember all of them. There was the teenage boy with the crooked tooth who died after drinking from a stagnant puddle. The old man who wandered off into the grass and never came back. Maybe a stroke, maybe just tired of walking. The mother with twins who only made it to Fort Kearney. The baby, too small to name, who was wrapped in linen and placed in a wooden box made from crate planks. And then there was the family who didn't have time to dig. You came across it a day after the fever passed through their wagon. 3 bodies left beside the trail, wrapped in blankets. No headstones, no words, no time, just the faint smell of death and a note pinned to the tree nearby. No tools, keep going. You helped bury them anyway, dug a hole with the flat side of a skillet in your own hands. No one spoke during that one. Here's your historical fact. At least 20,000 people are estimated to have died along the Oregon Trail. Disease was the primary killer: cholera, dysentery, typhoid, but many also died from accidents, exposure, malnutrition, or injuries. Most were buried in shallow graves right beside the trail. A few were buried under the trail itself, with wagons driven over their resting places to disguise them from animals and looters. Quirky fact, some immigrants placed sentimental items in graves, buttons, lockets, even letters. One woman insisted her husband be buried with a silver dollar under his tongue to pay the toll at Heaven's Gate. Another placed her baby's rattle on the grave and said, "So she won't be lonely." These quiet, private traditions often went unrecorded, but lingered in oral histories passed down generations later. Scholars continue to debate how death on the trail shaped the American pioneer identity. Some argue that the high mortality rate was glossed over in favour of more heroic narratives. Land won, cities built, manifest destiny fulfilled. Others believe the very nature of the trail, with its constant movement and lack of time for mourning, created a culture of resilience forged by shared suffering. A culture where grief became background noise. Out here, death becomes ordinary, not acceptable, not forgotten, but expected. You learn to spot the signs: someone walking slower, falling behind, eyes too dull. You keep an eye on them, offer water, offer silence. Sometimes they recover, sometimes they don't. There's a kind of camaraderie in loss, though. When someone dies, everyone pitches in, even the ones you thought didn't care. A man who hasn't spoken to you in a week will help dig the grave. A woman with no spare cloth will tear her apron in half for a burial shroud. Grief, out here, is a community effort. The only way it doesn't eat you alive. And then somehow you move on. You hitch the oxen, pack the wagon, wipe dirt from your face and tuck a child's curls behind their ear. You eat a few bites of whatever didn't spoil overnight, and then you walk. Again, past the latest grave, past the spot where someone else gave up, past all the places where you quietly wonder if you'll leave your own bones someday. The road doesn't stop for grief. You walk through it, with it. One evening, a girl from another wagon places a flower, a single prairie daisy, on a grave you passed hours earlier. She tucked it behind her ear, carried it all day waiting for the right place. You don't know whose grave it was. Maybe she didn't either. Didn't matter. You don't talk about it. You just nod. That night the stars feel a little colder, and you dream of Missouri, not because you want to go back, but because you still remember what it felt like not to carry so much silence in your chest. You knew the trail would be hard. You expected hunger, exhaustion, disease, maybe even a few scuffles over supplies. What you didn't count on was the sheer, unrelenting chaos that people and animals bring with them. One day everything seems more or less under control, the next you're dodging flying hooves, separating brawling men and chasing chickens that made a break for it like they're part of some doomed jailbreak. The Oregon Trail isn't just a path west. It's a rolling pressure cooker full of people with short fuses, long grudges, and way too much time to be mad. It starts with a stampede. You're half asleep, curled under your blanket with a sore back and the stars in your eyes, when the earth trembles. Just a slight vibration at first, enough to rattle the pans. Then the sound comes. Thundering hooves, guttural lowing, the unmistakable crack of wood splintering. You're on your feet in an instant, heart hammering, stumbling through darkness as shapes blur past in panic. Someone's oxen got spooked, probably by a coyote, or a raccoon, or maybe their own shadow. Doesn't matter. The result is 30 tons of panicked livestock barreling through camp. You duck behind a wagon just in time to avoid being trampled. Another wagon isn't so lucky. You hear it collapse under the force, pots and barrels spilling everywhere, the canvas top flapping like a shroud. You spend the next 2 hours chasing cattle with makeshift torches, calming screaming children, and yelling yourself hoarse. When the chaos finally dies down, the damage is worse than you thought. 2 wagons busted, 1 cow injured. a dog missing, and 3 people furious enough to swear they're turning back. No one does, of course. There's nowhere to go. The next morning, the arguing starts. Turns out the stampede started because one guy, Lars, the loud Swede with the fancy hat, left his oxen untied to graze at night. Someone else blames the camp layout. Another person accuses the fiddler, yes, there's a fiddler, of playing devil's music too close to the animals. Fists fly. One man ends up with a bloody nose and a bruised ego. You stand nearby, trying not to get involved, but also enjoying the show just a little more than you should. And it only gets messier. By now, the group has been travelling together for weeks. Familiarity has replaced politeness. People snore too loud, chew too close, borrow flour without asking. Small annoyances fester until they're full-blown feuds. You hear the same complaints over and over. He thinks he's in charge. She never pulls her weight. They're stealing water. It's like a long, dusty episode of Frontier Housewives of Nebraska territory. One day, 2 women get into it over a cooking fire. One claims the other's kid stole her salt pork. The accused fires back that the pork tasted like shoe leather anyway. Voices rise, hands fly. You've never seen a bonnet get used as a weapon, but now you have. The husbands get involved. The wagon master steps in and threatens to divide the camp. Everyone cools off until dinner, when someone accidentally dumps a pot of beans in the offender's fire. Here's your historical fact. Conflict among wagon parties was common and often intense. With weeks or months of close proximity, stress and shared hardship, even the most level-headed emigrants could snap. Disputes over leadership, livestock, chores and space frequently escalated. Some wagon groups broke apart entirely, going separate ways mid-journey and hoping the trail would be kinder in smaller numbers. Quirky fact. Some wagon trains created written rules or even miniature constitutions to govern behaviour, with agreed-upon consequences for breaking them, like fines for profanity or official cooling-off periods after fights. One group famously implemented no singing before noon after an overly enthusiastic teenager kept waking everyone up with off-key ballads. And the debate? Scholars disagree over whether the social breakdowns on the trail reflect the failure of community or its strange durability. Some argue that these wagons were a microcosm of society, subject to all its dysfunctions and dramas. Others believe the ability to recover from conflict, to keep walking after a screaming match or a fistfight, is proof of the unspoken bond among pioneers. Survival first, feelings later. After the stampede, your group changes, not formally, not with any kind of vote, but with the subtle shifts that come from shared disaster. People stick closer to their own wagons, fewer meals are shared, conversations stay quiet and cautious, the fiddler doesn't play for a few days. Even the oxen seem tense. But trail life doesn't allow anyone to sulk forever. There's too much to do. Wheels to fix, food to cook, feet to keep moving. Slowly the social walls erode again. You see one man hand another a nail when his axle creaks. A woman passes out boiled coffee grounds with a wink. The fiddler starts playing again, just softly, and no one stops him. Still you keep your guard up. People are like animals out here. They scare easy, spook easy, turn mean when hungry or tired or pushed. You've seen grown men cry over lost boots, and grown women laugh while digging graves. The line between function and breakdown is razor thin. 1 minute, it's cooperation. The next, it's chaos. You walk through both. One evening, as the sun sets red and too quiet, you hear a shot. Everyone freezes. Another shot. Then silence. You run toward the noise. A man stands over a dead mule, his own. It broke its leg and wouldn't stand. He had to shoot it. His hands shake, his eyes are hollow. No one says a word. Another man walks up and helps him drag the body out of sight. Then everyone returns to camp like it never happened. Because that's how it works out here. Everything falls apart. Then everyone pretends it didn't. That night the wind kicks up again. You hear someone crying softly under their wagon. Someone else is singing, and somewhere in the darkness the fiddler starts a slow tune. You fall asleep to the sound of tension retreating, for now. But the trail is long, and the next stampede is always closer than you think. When someone in camp whispers that a trading post lies just over the next ridge, you don't believe them. You've been burned before, probabilities of fresh bread, bullets, or even just soap, all leading to nothing but disappointment and a dry stretch of nothing. But still the idea plants itself in your mind and grows roots. A trading post, a fort, civilization. Even if it's just a shack with 3 mouldy biscuits and a mule for sale. It sounds like salvation. The next day, the ridge comes into view. And this time, the rumour's right. You crest the hill, and there it is. A cluster of buildings nestled along a bend in the river, smoke rising gently from chimneys. It's not much. 2 main structures, a few smaller huts, and what might be a fenced garden, but to your weary, dust-blind eyes, it might as well be Rome. The kids cheer. A woman actually claps. The wagon master just nods grimly and mutters something about keeping expectations low. You reach the fort around noon, the sun high and hot. The smell hits you first. Smoke, horse, sweat, and something that might be beans but could also be despair. A sign out front says Fort Bernard in faded paint. Though everyone refers to it as the place with the barrel of flour and no manners. You park the wagons in a loose circle, tie off the oxen, and head toward the trading house with your meagre supply of bartering goods clutched tightly. Scraps of cloth, a pocket knife, 2 buttons, and a desperate smile. Inside, it's chaos. Dozens of people crowd around a wooden counter, waving items, arguing, pleading. Behind the counter stands a man with the expression of someone who's been yelled at for 17 hours straight and has mentally disassociated from his own body. He's thin, pale, and wearing a fur hat that might be more mole than animal. His assistant, possibly his brother, possibly a reanimated scarecrow, shovels beans into a sack with the urgency of a man underwater. Prices are outrageous. A pound of flour costs more than you'd ever pay back home. A single candle is worth a shirt. Coffee? Forget it. A man in line says he traded his last pair of socks for a handful of tobacco and doesn't regret it. You believe him. You'd trade your own boots for a cup of strong coffee and 2 quiet hours. Still, you manage to strike a deal. You trade a small tin mirror and a scarf for a chunk of hard cheese and half a jar of molasses. The man behind the counter eyes you like he's making a very unwise business decision. You smile sweetly and back away before he changes his mind. Outside, the others are making similar trades, some for supplies, some for stories. One young man gets roped into a dice game and loses the only bar of soap in his family. Another woman barters for a new bonnet and walks around camp like royalty for the rest of the day. You get water from the well, cool, clean, and miraculous. The kids bathe in the shallows of the river with actual soap. You scrape mud off your boots, scrub your face, and sit for a moment without doing anything, just breathing, watching. That alone feels luxurious. Here's your historical fact. Trading posts and forts were crucial to overland migration. Fort Kearney, Fort Laramie, and Fort Bridger were key supply stops for emigrants, offering food, tools, and information about trail conditions ahead. Prices varied wildly, and while some posts were known for fairness, others were infamous for gouging desperate travellers. Still, they often meant the difference between survival and failure. Quirky fact, some forts sold soda biscuits made with saleratus, an early baking soda that left the bread with a strange flavour and sometimes a greenish tint. One traveller swore the biscuits tasted like lye soap but were soft enough to eat with a toothache. Another described them as both food and punishment. Scholars often debate the role of trading posts as cultural hubs. Beyond commerce, these places became crossroads where emigrants, fur trappers, missionaries, indigenous peoples and outlaws all converged, sometimes to trade, sometimes to argue, and sometimes to quietly observe one another from a safe distance. Diaries describe uneasy peace, tense negotiations, and the occasional unlikely friendship born over a shared bottle of whiskey. That night, the fort becomes a festival ground. Fires burn higher, meals are slightly less grim. Someone opens a bottle of something labelled medicinal and passes it around. The children run wild through the grass, faces clean for once. Even the oxen seem to relax, standing still without anyone yelling at them for 5 minutes straight. You trade for a bit of news, too. Comes from a wagon train ahead of you. They lost 3 to cholera, but say the mountain passes are clear for now. Another traveller shares a crude map he drew himself. It's mostly scribbles, but it gives you hope that you're at least not lost. But not everyone is comforted. A man from your group corners the trading post assistant and demands to know how many days it is to the next fort. The assistant shrugs and says, "Depends who's sick and whose wheel breaks." The man curses and storms off, muttering something about damn fools and dust. Even in this brief moment of respite, tension simmers. Supplies are tight, nerves are frayed, and no matter how good it feels to rest, you know you can't stay. The next morning you wake early. You refill your water, pack up your wagon, and make sure the molasses jar is safely tucked between sacks of beans. You say goodbye to the strange little cluster of buildings that gave you a break from the endless road. You walk past the carved initials on the fort's gate, evidence that you're not the first to pass through, and you won't be the last. As the wagons roll out, a boy waves goodbye to one of the fort's workers, a teenage girl who nods solemnly, then turns back to her chores. The boy sighs. You don't say anything, but you understand the trail doesn't allow for long goodbyes, only forward motion. You glance back one last time at the fort, small, stubborn, weather-beaten, and then let it fade into the dust. Ahead lies more prairie, more hunger, and a whole lot more walking. There's a go-to-sleep in your bedroll. You don't know how it got there, you don't know whose it is, and honestly, you don't care. It's warm, it's not biting anyone, and at this point in the trail, that qualifies as a welcome guest. You nudge it gently, and it blinks at you like it owns the place. Then it farts and trots off to chew on someone's firewood. You sit up slowly, bones groaning, and realise that you've started seeing your fellow creatures. Pets, livestock, even the random squirrel as members of the caravan, just as vital and dysfunctional as the humans. Take Pickles, for example. Pickles is the goat that joined your train back near Fort Kearney. You're not sure who originally owned him, but somewhere along the line, ownership became communal. Pickles has visited every wagon, chewed on every bonnet, and tried to headbutt every sleeping ox. He's fearless, foul-smelling, and oddly affectionate. The children adore him, the adults mostly tolerate him, but deep down, everyone agrees he's the emotional support goat of the Oregon Trail. Then there's Buster the dog, half mutt, half hero. He guards the wagons at night, barks at anything suspicious, which is everything, and once chased off a coyote with more courage than sense. He's taken to walking beside the wagon with a purposeful gait, like he's on patrol. His ears are always alert, his tail twitching like a metronome. He sleeps curled under the tongue of the lead wagon, and growls at strangers like he's seen some things, which frankly he has. Livestock too have become more than cargo. You used to think of your oxen as walking engines. Now they're family. You know their moods, which one likes to be scratched behind the ears, which one pretends to limp for sympathy. You talk to them more than you talk to some people. After all, they listen, and they don't try to lecture you on proper axle maintenance. Your milk cow, Lucy, is a trooper. She gives less milk these days. Something about the stress or the dust or the fact that she's over being dragged across an entire continent. But she still produces just enough to make breakfast bearable. You protect her like she's royalty. When she got a small cut on her leg, half the camp pitched in to bandage it and sing soothing songs, which mostly just confused her. Still she mooed in approval. Here's your historical fact. Many families brought livestock with them on the trail, not just oxen and mules, but chickens, goats, pigs, dogs, and milk cows. These animals provided essential resources: eggs, milk, meat, and protection. They were often treated as part of the family, even given names and slept in the wagon during storms or extreme weather. Quirky fact: some pioneers kept raccoons, badgers, and even prairie dogs as pets. One girl reportedly smuggled a duckling in her apron for 3 weeks, feeding it bits of hardtack until it was big enough to waddle alongside the wagon. It lived in a bucket when not in motion and quacked at anyone who got too close. When it was lost during a river crossing, the entire camp held a small memorial. And the debate. Historians have long discussed the emotional role of animals on the trail. Were they just practical assets, or did they become surrogate friends in a harsh, isolating world? Diaries often read like letters to beloved pets, filled with worry, affection, and grief. Some scholars argue that these bonds reflect a deeper truth about the trail experience. People didn't just survive by strength, they survived through companionship, even the kind that comes on 4 legs and smells like yesterday's beans. You watch one of the kids feeding Pickles a strip of old cornbread. The goat gobbles it, then tries to climb into the wagon like he's suddenly the foreman. The kid laughs until her father shoos the goat away, muttering about fleas and chewing habits, but even he's smiling. Later you see 2 boys building a harness for their dog using spare leather and bits of broken bridle. They attach him to a tiny cart no bigger than a laundry basket, and take turns riding inside. The dog is confused but seems proud. It's the closest thing to joy anyone's had in days, but not every animal makes it. That afternoon one of the mules goes down, just collapses mid-step and won't rise. The owner, a quiet man who rarely speaks, kneels beside it, stroking its neck, whispering things no one else hears. The others keep moving, not out of callousness, but because there's nothing to do. The man stays behind with a shovel. When he rejoins the train that evening, he's silent. His hands are filthy. His eyes are unreadable. You offer him some leftover molasses bread. He nods and eats it without tasting it. You understand? Everyone does. That night, Pickles curls up beside the fire like he owns it. A few chickens roost in the wagon, heads tucked under wings, dreaming whatever it is chickens dream. Lucy the cow lies nearby, chewing calmly, a massive, breathing symbol of persistence. And Buster, ever the sentinel, lies near the oxen, eyes half shut but always watching. You sleep more soundly knowing they're all there. The trail has a way of stripping you down. It takes your comforts, your habits, your illusions, but it also gives strange gifts, like a goat who knows when you need cheering up, or a dog who barks just before the storm hits, or a cow who gives one last cup of milk even when she's tired. Out here, you take love wherever it shows up, even if it's got hooves. There's a rhythm to the trail now. It's not pleasant exactly, but it's familiar, like a tune you didn't choose but hum anyway because it won't leave your head. Wake up before sunrise, pack everything you unpacked last night, eat something that vaguely resembles food, hitch up the oxen, start walking, walk until your knees whisper threats, stop, eat again, make camp, repeat. This is your life now, the endless prairie shuffle. The days have a sameness to them that borders on surreal. Time becomes elastic. You forget what month it is, then what week. At some point, even the days blur together like smeared ink. The only real calendar you have is your body, a blister on your right heel that's almost healed, the dull ache in your lower back that's been there since you slipped stepping over that stump. You mark the passage of time by injuries, not dates. 15 to 20 miles a day. That's what the wagon master said at the start, back when his hat was still clean and his optimism intact. Now he doesn't say much, just nods, points, and keeps walking, like the rest of you. You walk past wagon ruts so deep they look like scars carved into the earth. You wonder how many others have passed through here, how many footsteps, how many wheels. You try to imagine the lives left behind, the little girl who lost her doll in this very patch of grass, the woman who gave birth behind that rock, the man who died of heat stroke just over that hill. Their stories are packed into the dirt now, buried under your boots. You get good at walking, not fast but steady. You learn the little tricks, how to wrap your toes in cloth to prevent blisters, how to tuck your chin so the sun doesn't fry your neck, how to breathe through your nose when the wind kicks up a dust storm. You pace yourself like an old mule, not glamorous, murderous, but effective. Meals are timed to movement now. Breakfast is whatever's left from the night before, eaten cold because lighting a fire at dawn feels like a luxury. Lunch is a mouthful of jerky or a heel of trail bread. You eat while walking, chewing slowly, letting your jaw do double duty with your legs. Dinner, if the day hasn't broken you completely, is a pot of beans or something boiled into submission. The smell of burnt coffee is the only consistent seasoning you have. Here's your historical fact. Most wagon trains aim to cover between 15 and 20 miles a day under ideal conditions. But ideal rarely showed up. Broken wheels, sick livestock, or difficult terrain often cut that figure in half. It took 4 to 6 months to complete the journey, longer if disaster struck. And disaster almost always struck. Quirky fact, some emigrants brought pedometers, yes, 1800s-style mechanical step counters, to track their daily mileage. One man boasted in his diary that he walked exactly 2,102 miles before breaking the device. Another woman tracked how many miles she could walk barefoot before giving up. Answer, 12. People got weird with their endurance. And here's the debate. Did pioneers walk more than they rode by necessity or by design? Some argue that walking preserved the health of the animals and reduced wagon strain, making it a strategic choice. Others claim pioneers had no choice. Riding in the wagon was often miserable, jarring and cramped. Regardless, most people walked 80 to 90% of the way. That's roughly the distance from New York to Salt Lake City. On foot, in bad shoes. By now your boots have moulded to your feet in the way only shoes that have seen too much can. You've patched them with string, rawhide, even a piece of metal someone swore would help. It didn't. You've developed a weird affection for them, like old abused pets that keep doing their job even when they clearly shouldn't. The kids walk too, not all day but enough. You glance over and see your son pacing out the alphabet with each step, mouthing letters in time with his feet. Your daughter hops over the cracks, counting softly under her breath. They don't whine as much anymore. That's not necessarily a good sign. The oxen plod along, resigned. Their hooves stir up little clouds of dust that settle on everything. Your skin, your food, your last nerve. You've stopped wiping it off. You've become dust. The trail has a way of turning everyone into a shade of beige. Every now and then someone sings. Not loud, just a tune under their breath. A hymn, a sea shanty, a bit of folk nonsense. It passes through the group like smoke, picked up by a second voice, then a third. The song fades as quickly as it begins, like it's too shy to stay long. Your thoughts shrink, the world narrows. It's all wagon wheels and footsteps. You think about stupid things, the exact shape of a cloud, the way a pebble feels under your boot, whether you'll ever eat cheese again. That one stupid knock-knock joke your cousin told a decade ago that resurfaces and haunts your brain for 6 hours straight. Sometimes you pass landmarks, big ones like Chimney Rock or Independence Rock, and people cheer. Others, like you, just nod. Another stone in the desert, another tick on the invisible progress bar. You stop seeing the landscape as scenery. It's just more of what you have to walk across. One afternoon you pass a broken-down wagon, its axle snapped in two, the canvas ripped like a peeled banana. There's no one there, just a single boot and a note carved into the wood. Gone to catch up. You never do. That evening, as the fire flickers low, and everyone slumps around it like a set of battered marionettes, you do the math. You've walked hundreds of miles. You'll walk hundreds more. And despite everything, your sore legs, the blister on your thumb, the gnawing hunger, you're still moving. That's what matters out here. Not how fast, not how clean, just that you keep putting one foot in front of the other, even when you don't remember why. You start to think the trail has a sick sense of humour. Just when you're feeling like you've gotten used to this endless, grinding march across the plains. Bam! There they are. The mountains. Not just hills or rolling rises like before, but real jagged, snow-dusted monsters looming in the distance like they've been watching you suffer, and now they're licking their lips. You heard stories about the Rockies back in Missouri. People said they were beautiful, majestic, the spine of the continent. What they didn't mention was that they're also the world's most relentless uphill treadmill, and you're about to start climbing it with a wagon held together by rope, rust, and the pure spite of your oxen. At first, the incline is gentle. It teases you. You start ascending slowly, trading the wide open plains for narrow winding paths. The air gets thinner. The trees get taller. The wind shifts, cooler now, with a sharpness that cuts through your clothes and reminds you that, yes, even in August, the mountains still think it's early spring. You stop sweating so much, but your joints start singing a new kind of misery. The real problem isn't the climb, it's everything that happens because of the climb. The wagon groans with every turn of the wheel, the oxen slip on loose gravel. The brake, oh the poor brake, is your best friend and worst enemy now. It keeps you from sliding backward down a hill, sure, but you can hear it disintegrating every time it catches. The trail narrows, sometimes barely wide enough for one wagon at a time. When you meet another group coming down, it becomes a logistical nightmare. Who backs up? Who waits? Who's going to be the first to suggest we all just stay here and build a new town called Stucksville? You smile, wave, and try not to glare at the other wagons like it's their fault the entire mountain has decided to play gatekeeper. And the turns, good lord, the turns. One wrong angle and your wagon could go from supplies for Oregon to kindling at the bottom of a ravine. You tie ropes around the rear wheels for drag. People walk alongside the wagons now, hands on the frame, guiding them around corners like they're herding cows with anxiety disorders. Here's your historical fact. The Rocky Mountains presented one of the greatest physical obstacles on the Oregon Trail. Emigrants often passed through South Pass, a relatively gentle but still treacherous route in present-day Wyoming. But even the best paths involved steep climbs, unpredictable weather, and grueling physical effort. Wagons had to be disassembled, hoisted, or lowered with ropes. Entire days could be spent covering just a few miles. Quirky fact, some wagons were fitted with what pioneers called mountain brakes, essentially chunks of wood jammed into the wheels to create drag. Others used tree trunks or logs chained behind the wagon like sled runners. One man even used his mother-in-law's rocking chair, lashed beneath the rear axle for extra resistance. It worked, for about 10 feet. And here's the scholarly debate. Some historians argue that the mountains were a defining psychological moment for emigrants, a true point of no return. Crossing them meant accepting you'd never go back. Others suggest that for many the mountains were simply another obstacle in a long string of them. Brutal, yes, but no more demoralising than dysentery or starvation. There's also disagreement about how much preparation travellers really had for the climb. Spoiler, usually not enough. As you keep climbing, things start to go wrong. A wagon in your group breaks a wheel on a sharp rock. You stop and help patch it with whatever wood you can find. Then the rain starts. Not the kind of gentle drizzle you dream about on hot days, but an icy slap straight from the sky's cruel heart. The path becomes slippery mud. The oxen dig in, straining, grunting, hooves losing grip every few steps. You trudge uphill with water soaking your clothes, your hair, your soul. It's the kind of rain that makes you question every life decision that led you to this moment. But you can't stop. There's no camp, no flat ground, just more incline, more winds, more trees that all look like they're judging you. Finally you find a clearing, barely big enough to circle the wagons, but it'll have to do. Everyone collapses into soggy heaps. Fires are hard to light, the wood too wet to burn properly. You eat cold beans, someone loses a boot in the mud. Another person swears he heard wolves howling. No one questions it. That night you try to sleep curled under a damp blanket with a rock pressing into your spine and your nose filled with the smell of wet leather and despair. But you can't stop thinking about what's ahead. More mountains, more cold, and somewhere up there, snow. You remember something an old man said weeks ago at a trading post. The last mountain always lies. You didn't understand it then. Now you do. Every peak you climb reveals another one beyond it. Each pass is just a prelude to the next. The top is never really the top, not until it is, and no one ever knows when that is. The next morning the air is crisp and cruel. Your hands are stiff with cold, your boots soaked through. But the view, dear God, the view stops you mid-step. Below you the trail winds like a ribbon through green valleys. Above the peaks shimmer with light. It's the first time in weeks that something feels beautiful, even majestic. You stand there for just a second, letting the silence soak in. Then the oxen moo, someone drops a skillet, and it's back to reality. But that view, it stays with you. Even as you start walking again. Even as the climb continues. Even as the next mountain looms. There's a smell you've grown used to out here. The mix of sweat, leather, smoke, dirt, and the faint, sour reek of fear. But today the air carries something new. Something sharper, meatier, and strangely promising. It wafts on the wind, drifting down the slope like a memory. Someone's cooking meat. Real meat. Not squirrel. Not charred bacon ends or a stringy rabbit boiled into grey sadness. Actual meat. You almost cry. The wagons ahead are clustered near a creek. A thin trail of smoke curling upward from a spit over a fire. A deer hangs nearby, half-skinned. Two men sit on logs, chewing slowly, heads down, looking like they have just remembered what happiness tastes like. When you approach, they nod and raise greasy fingers. One of them even offers you a strip of venison jerky, like it's nothing, like it's not the most generous gift you've received in 3 states. You say thank you, you mean it. Food on the trail has been getting creative. You've had days where your only meal was a handful of beans, soaked in last night's dishwater. You've seen people boil leather, scrape moss off rocks, and nibble the crust off old wagon bread like it's the last crust of civilization. The rations that once seemed enough, flour, cornmeal, dried pork, rice, have dwindled to crumbs and regrets. And hunting? Well, let's just say it's more of a gamble than a guarantee. The deer was pure luck. A young buck stumbled down to the creek this morning unaware, or maybe just tired of running. One clean shot and it was down. You haven't seen that kind of bounty in weeks. The meat is being rationed slowly, cooked in strips, dried for later, and portioned out like it's gold. You get your share, small, tough, and smoky, and you chew it like you're savouring a childhood memory. Your own food supplies are a sad echo of what they once were. The barrels in the wagon are nearly empty. You're down to the last of the flour, and it's turned slightly sour. The bacon is mostly grease now, wrapped in stained paper that smells like wet regret. Beans, maybe enough for one more meal. Hardtack, you've broken 2 teeth on that cement disguised as food. It's a chewable threat. Here's your historical fact. Most pioneers packed between 400 to 600 pounds of food per person for the journey. But despite their best planning, food scarcity was a constant threat. Spoilage, poor storage and simple miscalculation often led to shortages by mid-journey. Hunting supplemented meals, but many found game scarce, especially in overhunted or well-travelled areas. Quirky fact, some pioneers tried to make coffee by roasting grain or even acorns. Others invented horrifying replacements for eggs, using flour water mixes or boiled plant roots. A few desperate souls brewed soup from parched corn and old ham bones, calling it journey stew. No one called it good. As for the scholarly debate, how bad did food insecurity actually get? Some historians argue that starvation was rare and the tales of boiled belts and leather soup were exaggerated. Others insist those accounts were far more common than we like to admit, especially during rough terrain or prolonged delays. Diaries often mask hunger behind euphemisms. Light supper, simple meal, went without today. You call it what it is, hungry. You've gone to bed hungry more times than you can count. Some nights you've lied to your kids and told them you already ate. Other times they have done the same for you. Hunger becomes a quiet roommate, always lingering nearby. Not dramatic, just persistent. A dull reminder that you're borrowing energy from your own bones. Still you adapt. You learn the edible plants, the bitter greens that grow near streams, the wild onions that make your hands stink but your stomach sing. You collect anything that looks remotely promising. Once you fried cattail roots. Another time you stewed something you think was a mushroom. You survived both meals. Barely. The wagon next to yours is faring worse. Their flour's gone mouldy. Their last salted pork turned out to be more salt than pork. You share a little of your venison jerky with them, not because you can spare it, but because you know they'd do the same. At least, you hope they would. Out here, you trade food like you trade secrets, carefully, and with the hope it won't come back to bite you. You also learn to stretch everything. You boil bones 3 times for broth. You scrape pans with bread to soak up every drop. You add water to beans until they're more bean-flavoured liquid than meal. You pretend it's soup. You pretend a lot of things out here. Every few days someone tries hunting. Usually it ends in disappointment. The deer and bison are long gone, pushed ahead by the noise of hundreds of wagons and weeks of pursuit. Every shot that misses feels like a personal insult, and even if you land one, butchering and preserving it takes time, and salt, which is its own scarcity now. Still, when someone returns with anything, a bird, a rabbit, a squirrel the size of a potato, it's a celebration. But there's a cost. A young man wandered off 3 days ago chasing a deer. He still hasn't come back. His mother pretends he'll show up any minute. His father knows better. That night someone makes dumplings with dried apple slices and a splash of leftover molasses. You each get half a dumpling. It's the best thing you've eaten in weeks. For a moment everyone's quiet, chewing slowly, eyes closed. Then someone starts humming, then a song. It's about home, or maybe just the idea of home. You go to bed that night with a stomach that's not full but not empty either. That's a victory. You sleep with the taste of venison still on your tongue and the fire still warm at your back. Tomorrow it'll be back to dry beans and regret. But tonight, you've eaten. And out here that's more than enough. The first time you see the river, it doesn't look so bad. Wide, yes, but calm. Blue-green and glassy, the kind of water that tricks you into thinking it's harmless. You've crossed streams before, creeks, little rivulets that barely splash over your boots, but this is different. This is a real river. The kind you can't see the bottom of. The kind with current strong enough to drag a wagon sideways and never look back. Your wagon master stands at the bank, arms crossed, scanning it like it insulted his mother. He squats, dips his fingers in, tastes it. Why, you don't know. And frowns. Then he turns to the group with a grunt and says, "We're fording it." The word hits like a slap. You hear it echoed up and down the line. Fording? Nobody cheers, nobody claps, because everybody knows the risks. The river has taken wagons before, it's taken oxen, it's taken children. Fording means rolling your entire life into rushing water and hoping it floats. There's a frantic hour of preparation. Everything comes off the wagon. Food, bedding, the good frying pan. You wrap the most precious things, photos, keepsakes, the tiny ceramic dog your daughter insists on bringing, with oilcloth and prayers. Some people try to caulk their wagon seams with pitch and rags. Others tie barrels to the sides like makeshift pontoons. You've seen some wagons float beautifully. You've seen others tip and vanish. When your turn comes, your hands tremble. The oxen step into the water uncertain. The current grabs at their legs, pulling them sideways. You grip the side of the wagon, every muscle locked, every breath shallow. The water rushes in, cold, furious, alive. It splashes over the wheels into the floorboards, up to your ankles. You hear a barrel shift. The wagon groans. For a moment, everything tilts. Then somehow it levels out. You make it across, soaked, shaking, but intact. Not everyone does. You watch another wagon tip. It happens fast. One wheel hits a rock, the axle twists, and then it's over. Supplies in the water, passengers screaming, the canvas top collapsing like a wet sail. A man jumps in after it, flailing. 2 children are pulled out by their mother, screaming and coughing. The wagon floats for a moment longer, then flips completely and disappears. There's no time for mourning. Others still have to cross. The river doesn't care, it just keeps flowing steady and indifferent. Later you gather what you can, bits of wood, a floating blanket, someone's skillet, dented but salvageable. The rest is gone. Here's your historical fact. River crossings were among the most dangerous challenges on the Oregon Trail. Major rivers like the Platte, Snake and Columbia could be treacherous. Immigrants either forded the river, driving their wagons through, or ferried across on makeshift rafts. Many drowned. Some lost all their supplies. Entire families were separated by the current, and some never reunited. Quirky fact, some pioneers swore by floating wagons lined with ox hides, turning them into giant tubs. Others fashioned crude rafts by lashing logs together and shoving the wagon on top. One woman famously strapped her piano to the roof thinking it would help the wagon float. It did not. And the debate. Historians disagree about the best strategies for river crossings. Some claim that ferries were underutilised due to high cost and long waits, leading to unnecessary deaths. Others argue that fording was often the only practical choice, especially in remote areas or when time was tight. Diaries reveal a mix of regret, calculation, and frequently blind optimism. You spend the night on the far bank, drying your clothes by the fire. The children sleep in a damp pile. The oxen are skittish, eyes wide, flanks twitching with leftover adrenaline. You hold a steaming cup of something vaguely resembling coffee and stare into the dark water, still hearing its roar in your ears. You think about what you lost. A sack of flour? A quilt? One of the chairs your husband carved last winter? And, worst of all, the Bible your mother gave you, wrapped in linen and hidden at the bottom of the trunk. It slipped out somewhere in the crossing. You watched it float away, just a dark rectangle bobbing along the surface like a farewell note. You didn't cry then, but now, by the fire, you do. The next morning there's a kind of fragile relief in camp. You made it. Everyone left in your group is accounted for. Not whole, maybe, but breathing. A few wagons are gone, a few faces missing, but the trail goes on, and so by default do you. Someone ties a bit of cloth to a nearby tree, a fluttering scrap, bright red against the grey-green pines. A marker, a memory, a warning, maybe all three. You pack up again, the oxen shuffle forward, the wheels squeak, your boots squish with every step, but you're across. And on the Oregon Trail, that's as close to a win as it gets. You don't get letters on the trail. That's just one of the first things you realise after the excitement wears off and the road stretches long. No postman, no mailbox, no penciled-in updates about the neighbour's new baby or how the corn crop's faring back in Missouri. But still, you carry pieces of home with you, tucked into memory, crumpled into pockets, or pressed between the pages of a book you haven't read in weeks. And every so often something happens that reminds you just how far away you really are. It starts with a rumour. Someone from another wagon claims they spoke to a man at Fort Hall who had news from back east, war brewing, or a new railway being planned, or maybe some big storm that flattened a town. Nobody can confirm anything, but the whispers spread fast. News out here moves like campfire smoke. Thin, untraceable, always smelling a little burned. You overhear 2 men arguing about whether Zachary Taylor is still president. One insists he died last year. The other says that's nonsense. He was alive when they left in May. You want to tell them it doesn't matter. Out here, politics don't make the food stretch or the oxen move. Out here, it's just about surviving the next mile. But you keep that to yourself. A few days later, you get your first real letter in months. It's a miracle. A man on horseback, a mail runner, is heading east. He carries a pouch of outgoing messages and, if the gods are smiling, a handful of replies from the last time someone made it through. Your family receives 3 letters that day. One is from your sister, another from a friend you barely remember. The third is from your mother. You recognise the shaky script before you even open it. The words hit like a wave. Your cousin died in childbirth. The neighbour boy you once kissed on a dare is off fighting somewhere. Your youngest niece is walking now. and someone sold your father's horse, your horse, the one with the white streak down its nose, gone. You read the letter 3 times, then you fold it and put it in your apron pocket, where the corners will curl and soften until it's unreadable. That's okay. You'll remember it by heart soon enough. Here's your historical fact. Mail service along the Oregon Trail was spotty and unpredictable. Most emigrants relied on forts and trading posts to send or receive letters. Some used dead drops, leaving notes under rocks or inside hollowed-out trees in hopes that the next traveller might carry them forward. Reliable postal systems didn't exist in many western areas until well after major settlements were established. Quirky fact, some trail letters were written on bark or scraps of cloth when paper ran out. One man famously wrote a letter to his sweetheart on a flattened tin plate using charcoal. Another carved a message into the side of a wagon tongue, then left it propped against a cairn. No word on whether the recipient ever got it. As for the scholarly debate, historians disagree on how much communication actually occurred between emigrants and those they left behind. Some claim that the trail was nearly sunned, a total break from life in the East. Others argue that, though infrequent, letters played a vital emotional role, providing psychological fuel for continuing. Many emigrants wrote journals addressed to loved ones they might never see again, using writing as a stand for presence. And you do write, not daily. You're too tired for that. But sometimes when the fire burns low and the kids are asleep, you pull out the small book you keep in the bottom of the wagon, the one with half the pages damp and the spine beginning to split. You write about the trail, about the weather, about the people you've met. You write about Lucy the cow, about the night you almost drowned, about the stew that gave everyone gas for 3 days. But mostly you write about what you miss. You miss the way home smells in late summer. Baked earth, tomatoes on the vine, wood smoke curling from the chimney before the first frost. You miss the creak of the porch swing and the rustle of newspaper pages turned by your father's steady hands. You miss knowing what tomorrow might look like. Some days you're not sure who you are anymore without the person you were back there. You hear others talking about the same thing. One woman keeps a ribbon from her wedding dress in her pocket, fingering it when she thinks no one's looking. A man wears a child's boot on a cord around his neck. His son died back near the Platte, and he hasn't spoken much since. Another woman wears her Sunday shoes every day, even though they've nearly fallen apart. She says she wants to arrive in Oregon looking like she meant to get there. And then there's the ghosts. Not the spooky kind, though the trail has plenty of places that feel haunted. No, these are the memories that walk beside you. The old routines. The voices you haven't heard in months. The way your sister used to hum when she peeled apples. The feel of your mother's hand smoothing your hair. These aren't things you can pack, but they come with you anyway. Sometimes it hurts to remember. Sometimes it's the only thing that keeps you going. You find yourself whispering stories as you walk, out loud, just barely. You tell your daughter about the schoolhouse, the one with the crooked bell tower and the chalk that always broke in your hand. You tell your son about the old dog you had as a child, how he used to snore louder than your grandfather. You tell yourself you'll remember everything. You try, but the trail changes you. By the time you reach the edge of the Blue Mountains, you don't look like the person who left Missouri. Your face is leaner, your clothes don't fit right, and your eyes have taken on that distant, forward-looking stare, the one that scans the horizon and doesn't linger too long on what's behind. You still carry letters in your pocket, you still read them on quiet nights, but you don't cry over them anymore, not because they matter less, because you've just gotten better at carrying the weight. You've been dreaming of Oregon for months. It was always the golden idea on the horizon, the whispered promise of rich soil and fat cattle, trees so tall they block out the sun, and rain. Glorious, abundant rain to wash the dust from your lungs and turn the dirt to green. But when you finally reach the edge of it, when the last of the mountains fall away and you start to descend into the Willamette Valley, it doesn't feel like a triumph. It feels like you've arrived late to a party no one told you had been cancelled. The trees are real, yes. Towering pines and firs that smell like sap and shade and new beginnings. The air is thick and heavy with dampness, a strange sensation after months of breathing dust and dry wind. The land rolls in soft waves, covered in tangled brush and stubborn mud. And it's raining. Not a polite drizzle, but a full, cold, miserable downpour that seeps into everything, your boots, your bedding, the very idea of happiness. This is not how you pictured it. There's no cheering, no banner saying welcome to Oregon, no parade waiting to celebrate your arrival. Just mud. Mud everywhere. Wagon wheels sink in it. Shoes disappear into it. Your oxen look at you with the blank stare of animals who've survived a lot and will not be amused by one more thing. You set up camp, or what passes for camp now. There's no dry ground. You try to stretch a tarp over the wagon to keep the rain out, but it sags in the middle and dumps a bucket of cold water into your flour barrel. You try not to scream. Instead, you sit under the wagon, soaked to the bone, gnawing on a piece of soggy bread and wondering what exactly you came all this way for. Here's your historical fact. When emigrants finally reached the Willamette Valley, many were shocked to find it less a paradise and more a soggy, overgrown wilderness. The early arrival season, typically late fall, meant heavy rains, few established settlements, and land that had to be cleared by hand. It took years of back-breaking labour before the promise of Oregon became reality for most. Quirky fact, some pioneers were so disappointed by the conditions in the valley that they simply left, heading south to California, or back east if they could afford it. Others stayed out of stubbornness. One woman famously declared upon arrival, "If this is Eden, I want a refund." And the scholarly debate, did the trail foster a sense of fulfillment upon arrival, or disillusionment? Historians argue both sides. Some say that completing the journey instilled a deep sense of purpose and resilience, even if the reward was modest. Others suggest that the harsh reality of Oregon exposed the trail's myth for what it was, a propaganda-fueled gamble sold to desperate people. You lean toward the second camp, at least today, because what you have now is wet blankets, a dozen broken spokes, and a patch of brushy land someone pointed at and called yours. No fences, no cabin, no waiting hearth, just the overwhelming task of starting again from nothing. The trail is over, yes, but the work is not even close. You look at the others, some are unpacking with mechanical determination, like they've turned off the part of their brain that screams for comfort. Others just sit, blank-faced, waiting for someone to tell them what to do next. A few are already talking about next spring, as if the last 6 months didn't just try to kill them on a weekly basis. You understand them, because despite it all, the hunger, the cold, the losses, you're still here. The trail didn't beat you, it changed you, stripped you down and rebuilt you with calloused hands and a spine made of gritted teeth. And you're not alone. You think about the people you met, those still with you, and those you buried along the way. You think about Pickles the goat who vanished somewhere near the Columbia River, last seen eating a hat. You think about Lucy the cow, who limped through her last 100 miles and now grazes nearby like she owns the place. You think about the letters in your pocket and the home you left behind. The trail isn't just something you walked, it's something that lives in your body now, in your scars, in your stories, in the way you can light a fire in the rain using 3 twigs and a sideways glance. You could survive anywhere now. That's what the trail gave you. One night around the fire, someone pulls out a bottle of something that smells like regret and celebration. You pass it around. No one says much. The rain has stopped, finally. The stars peek through like they forgot to be angry. Someone starts humming that old tune again, the one that's followed you since Kansas. Others join in softly, like they're afraid it'll vanish if they sing too loud. You think about what you lost. A sister, a friend, your Bible, the simple, small life you used to know. But you think about what you found too. Grit, community, stories, and a kind of quiet power that comes from surviving something you probably shouldn't have. You're in Oregon now. It's not the dream they sold you. It's wetter, rougher, meaner in its own way. But it's also yours. You sleep under a tarp that leaks and dream of building something that doesn't. Tomorrow the work begins, but tonight you made it. You're lying on your back now in a structure that can barely be called a house. 4 walls, a roof that leaks a little, a stove that sometimes works, and a mattress made of straw that pokes through the sheet like it holds a grudge. But it's not a wagon. It's not the cold, hard ground under open sky. It's shelter. It's a start. Outside, the wind hums through the trees, those tall Oregon pines standing like sentinels in the mist. The same trees that blocked your view on the day you arrived, the ones you cursed for being in the way, now feel like protection. You've cleared a bit of land, planted seeds, lost most of them, but 1 or 2 sprouted, and that's something. You close your eyes and see the trail again, the endless walking, the stampedes, the grave on the hill you didn't have time to mark properly, the ridiculous goat, the mountain that almost broke your wagon, and you. And somehow all of it feels distant and present at the same time, like it's been etched into your bones. You're not who you were in Missouri. That version of you wouldn't last 10 minutes here. You're harder now, quieter, but also somehow more grateful for the smallest things. A dry sock, a warm meal, a friendly voice that doesn't ask for anything in return, and sleep. Blessed, dreamless sleep. Tomorrow you'll start over again, clear more brush, patch the roof, try to build something lasting. Something worth all that walking. But for now, you listen to the wind, let it sing you to sleep, because the trail is behind you, and the rest, whatever it becomes, is finally yours to walk by choice.